Sorry for the delay. Just as I was about to be ready, just had a bunch of things come up all at once. But hey, look, it's a Wednesday stream I didn't miss. It was not every other Wednesday I'll read the book. Um, so now we're at chapter 13. We have 2 chapters left, and then the epilogue. So we'll be finishing the story tonight. Unless, internet goes out, God forbid. Um, Last we left off, we, Yuri met her, great uncle, who had been so corrupted by the King in Yellow's power in his search to find a way to, restore life, that he had become a giant monster. Um, don't jinx stream, I'll do whatever the fuck I want, Casey. How's it going? Um, but he had become a giant monster who only had brief moments of where he could think straight, um, before he just went back to being overwhelmed by the power of the Yellow King. Uh, and uh, Ash and the doctor were basically like, yeah, we decided we were gonna show you him because we don't think you grasped what we meant when we said, if we find your brother, he might not be your brother anymore. Then as they're running away, uh, Yuri passed out. When she woke up, she was outside the ruins with the doctor, and, Ash was still in the ruins. Sky was still in the ruins. Aju was with her. And then in the distance, these giant hands made out of wind started destroying a town, which the doctor identified as being the palace. That King, was it Kendrick? Was buried at, basically. There are a lot of people. Yeah, there's a lot of people to keep track of, but not that many. It's just there's a lot going on. um, and then the hands started coming towards them. The doctor revealed that he, like Utsu, is a tainted blood person. And he has super strength, and his limbs can become really long. And so he's been trying to find a cure for it and trying to help out before he loses control, because he was saying that all the people that have the tainted blood become like Yuri's great uncle eventually. Um, and so they then made their way to the palace, where Yuri and where Ash basically told Yuri, like, hey, this is your last chance to turn back, basically, once we go in there. It's okay if you don't want to go. You are a kid. Like, it's okay if you want to stay. And the whole while, there's been this mystery of Sky is not who Yuri thinks Sky is. He's more so. Because Ash ran into another one of the wolves. This guy wasn't much for fighting. He was more of a books kind of person. Like, books isn't smart. Not books isn't literally all the other books in the story. And that guy's like, yeah, if Ash should tell you what's going on. And Ash is basically like, yeah, we'll tell you later kind of thing. Um, and they're basically like, if you go, you also need to ask Sky if he wants to go. Like, you can't force Sky to do this one. And she asked Sky, and Sky hesitated, but decided they wanted to go. And as they were going in, a voice started calling to Yuri, that was her brother's. And Ash stopped her and said, "That's a ruse to lure you away from where you need to go. Uh, it's a voice I've been hearing for a long time. It's a voice that's led me away many a times. Because for him, it's the voice of Kendrick, his half brother, calling for help. And he knows that Kendrick is dead. Uh, so, here we go into the book. Chapter 13 Reunion. Get ready. The world is about to change. Ash's piercing warning came as they stepped through the rift. Yuri found herself unable to walk through the rift with her eyes open, so she had closed them, but she soon discovered the meaning of Ash's words for herself. What is this? Are we really below ground? No way. This isn't underground. This is... Are we inside the palace? They were standing in the center of a large octagonal hall, stone walls on all sides. Yuri spun around, looking in every direction, but nowhere could she find the rift they had just come through. Corridors led from the hall in four directions, and in the corner directly before them stood a raised, semicircular platform with a railing that ran along its length. Yuri assumed the platform was flat on top, like a stage, but it was so high up, at least as high as a five-story building, that she could only guess. Stairs climbed to the top on either side of the platform. The ceiling of the hall was even higher above their heads. She had to tilt her head back a full 90 degrees to see it. The ceiling was also octagonal in shape, with a mosaic of gold, silver, and some black stone. Obsidian, Yuri guessed, adorning its center. The crest of the current king, Parvane II, Ash said. Looking up, his breath was white in the air. For the first time, Yuri noticed the freezing cold. You may recall the story I told you of the Hatelands royal family's long history of sibling rivalry. That is why our kingdom has more than one royal crest, in case you were wondering. Countless candles had been set in the holders along the walls, so high up it made Yuri dizzy to think of how anyone managed to change them. The weak flames flickered, yet managed to light the entire vastness of the hall. A pair of much larger sconces stood before the central stage, illuminating the relief on the wall behind it, and something else. Someone's there. Ash had his foot on the first step of one of the staircases. My memory is correct. This room is the king's audience chamber. The metal studs on his boots rang against the stone steps. Yuri hurriedly followed after him, and taking Sky's hand, she began to climb. Odd that we should first enter here, directly into what was once the very heart of the palace. A great stone throne sat atop the platform, its back to a large painted relief on the wall. A thick cloak hung over the back of the throne. Who's there? A knight in silver armor sat slumped against the railing of the platform, facing the throne. A large, double-edged dim light. The blood that spilled from his shoulder looked black as tar. The blood had clearly been drying for some time, though the nearest candles reflected wetly off of its surface. He's one of the rescue party. Ash knelt by the fallen knight. Good sir, he said, if you still draw breath, tell me what happened to the occupants of the palace. Yuri stepped closer, noticing the delicate ornamentation on the knight's armor. The grip of his sword was similarly decorated. He must have been a man of some stature. "All dead," the knight whispered, merely drawing breath that seemed painful for him. Not only his arm, but his face too had been savaged terribly. It was not the kind of wound such as a sword or a spear might make. The deep gouges in his armor and the side of his face suggested giant fangs and wicked talons. The knight spoke again, his voice growing weaker with every word. "Or they were swallowed by the darkness as they lived. They started to become." "Don't talk, you'll wear yourself out," Yuri said, as she and Sky tried to help the man lie down on his side. He resisted, feebly batting at them with his remaining arm. Yuri noticed he was missing an eye as well. "The palace is as you see it," he continued, his voice somewhat stronger. "It was an evil magic that did this. Twisted the very fabric of the place. Rooms in place of other rooms. Nothing where it should be. I know these halls well enough to walk them blindfolded, and still I despaired of finding the way out." The knight's breath came in pained, ragged gulps as he turned his face to look toward the throne. "The king is over there. If you can, please take him outside." Yuri jumped back in surprise. She had thought what lay over the throne was only a cloak. Ash walked over, almost reverently lifted a corner of the cloak. The cloth was covered with fine embroidery, and the hem lined with jewels. Yet it was marred with dark splotches of blood and torn clean through in places. A man's arm swung out from beneath the cloak, but it was gravity that moved it, not life. And the arm wasn't so much an arm as the bony remains of one, hung with tattered strips of dried skin. His face a blank mask, Ash swept the cloak away, revealing the body. A delicate lace collar still hung around the corpse's neck. All the hair on Yuri's body was standing straight on end. It attacked the king's chamber first. Ash acknowledged the knight, pained whisper with a nod. The knight continued. "By the time we arrived, the king was already as you see him now." "I see no crown." "It was stolen." Ash nodded again, then asked, "Are you one of his personal guard?" "I was in the 3rd squadron. Perhaps my captain is. Yes, he must still be alive. If you should meet my captain." Ash turned to the dying man. "First tell me something. Kirik, that's his name." "Hey, Carp." "First tell me something. Part of Kirik's remains was buried somewhere inside the palace. A knight of the personal guard should know where that is. I'm sure a guard was posted." At the sound of Kirik's name, a look of violent disgust passed over the knight's bloodied face. "What's this now? Kirik? So Kirik has come back to claim what was his?" "The thing that attacked the king, what did it look like?" The knight's remaining eye swam with fear. "It had no shape. It flew in like a foul wind, a dark shadow, bearing the stench of blood." "Did it say anything?" The knight barely managed to shake his head. "There were no words." Ash turned again to the body of Harvain II and casually tossed the cloak back over it. Perhaps only the king knew the location of the remains. That's why Kirik went for him first. Drink of his knowledge and memory. Ash straightened and said, "Looks like there's no way to go but further in." Yuri blinked with surprise. "Just going to leave him there? Wasn't he your king?" "And now he's just a corpse. There's no saving him," Ash grumbled as he headed back toward the stairs. "Nor do I think that king there would look kindly upon me touching the corpse. Nor do I think that knight there would look kindly upon me touching the corpse. Lonely undertaker that I am." Yuri had her hand on the knight's armored shoulder. She felt him tremble violently at Ash's words. "What?" he gasped. his bloodshot eye looking like it might pop out of his skull. An undertaker. Your hands are stained with the demon's blood. You touched the king. The knight struggled to stand, and Yuri hurriedly held him down, placing one hand on her forehead, thinking to heal him. The knight pushed her away with a growl. You're only a child. What are you doing in this place? Just sit still a moment. You were friends with that cursed man? If so... The knight's mouth twisted with rage. Stay! Stay away from the king, you foul creature! Yuri, something's coming! Aju squeaked from her collar. Yuri looked up. Next to her, Sky braced himself. The two were scanning the chamber when something stung Yuri's cheek. The ceiling! Aju screamed. Hurry! Ash shouted up from the bottom of the stairs. Get low! Yuri crouched by the railing and looked up. Far above their heads, the royal crest was starting to break apart. First the silver and gold parts, then the black gems broke away, fell down in streams of dust. Streams narrowed, twisting like cyclones, bending through the air of the cavern, tangling with other streams, and breaking back into showers of dust. Then the streams began to take shape. From the black dust grew a pair of wings, and soon the swirls of debris emerged a bird of dust. A bird as large as Yuri, its long beak snapped shut with a loud clap that reverberated through the chamber. Soon another bird thing formed, then another, and another, their numbers increasing as she watched. The gold and silver streams of dust became gold and silver snakes, but snakes with arms as long again as their bodies. 3 claws formed at the tip of each arm, each as sharp as a blade. The snake's arms tangled together in the air, their claws sparkling like flint where they met. Ash lifted a 2-handed sword above his head and ran for the staircase. As though he had been waiting for that signal, the creatures of gold, silver, and black rushed down from the ceiling as one, howling as they descended toward him. Sky, watch the night. Sky, watch the night, Yuri shouted as she hefted her mace. Aju dived under the collar of her vestments, began chanting furiously. Swing your mace, Yuri. She did so, and a translucent disc appeared, shining as it hovered in the air before her. That's a shield. Grab it. Mace in her right hand, shield in her left, Yuri met the creatures as they slid down through the air. The orb at the tip of her mace flashed brilliantly, its light enough to send the creatures spinning and writhing away from her. She struck a blow, shattering the claw of the snake that reached for her like it was an exploding chandelier. Its body cracked down the middle, the severed halves crumbling back to inanimate dust before Yuri's eyes. Aju jumped atop her head. Don't let me fall off, Yuri. Standing on his hind legs, the mouse began to spin, singing the words of a spell. As he spun, tiny orbs of light sprayed forth from the tip of his long tail. Each orb was no larger than a pea, yet when they hit, the creatures roared with rage and pain. Ash stood his ground in the middle of the hall, swinging his mighty blade, hewing down like a farmer cuts wheat, any creature foolish enough to have been lured away from the throne. The dust from their remains billowed like clouds, till Yuri could barely see him through the haze. I'm getting dizzy, Aju squeaked. He tumbled down onto Yuri's shoulder. One of the black-winged creatures darted toward them, and Yuri met it with her mace. Close up, the thing was body. The tip of the pyramid opened, swallowing the head of her mace. Flew. Sky huddled over the wounded knight, the human shield for the fallen man. Yuri, Aju squeaked. Swing your mace this way a bit. Sky, grab the shield and fight. Sky reached out and grabbed the translucent shield, holding it out in front of him with both arms. The knight was sprawled on the floor, grasping for the hilt of his sword. The gold and silver snake darted toward them, slammed into Sky's shield, and screeched as it was repulsed and sent tumbling against the throne. Sword, my sword. The knight had just managed to get his fingers around the hilt when a pair of black wings hurled through the air directly toward the knight's back. Look out! Sky let go of the shield and threw himself over the knight. Sky! It all happened so fast, Yuri could do nothing. She had only just lifted her mace when the creature's gleaming beak slammed into the nameless devout. Yuri screamed and kept screaming, but nothing happened to Sky. The creature passed right through him and vanished, as if his body had simply absorbed the monster. Yuri's head wobbled, the shock silencing her. Sky looked up at her. His eyes were blank. Will you pick up the shield, Sky? Aji shrieked. Pick it up now! Quickly! Quickly! Do it! Hand still on his sword, the one-armed knight twisted his head to look at Sky. His one good eye opened wide. What are you? He said, and then in a whisper he added, Cursed thing. Just loud enough for Yuri to hear. Couldn't believe it. He could barely move. The knight was pushing himself away from Sky. With all the strength that remained in his damaged body, he sat up and pointed the tip of his sword directly at the nameless devout. Who are you? All of you. The knight's face was twisted with fear and rage. His voice cracked, and spittle flew from his lips. Who are you? You're friends of that thing that did this, aren't you? As she hammered at another one of the creatures, Yuri shouted back, We are most definitely not cursed. As she said it, the tip of Yuri's mace glowed brightly, flooding the entire tops of the dais with light. The white orb of light grew larger and larger, swallowing up Yuri, Aju, and Sky, and expanded further still, flooding over the steps until it reached down as far as where Ash was standing in the hall below. Smoke began to rise from the leather pads on the wolf's shoulders. He held up a hand to shield his face from the light and roared, Yuri, close your eyes! Everyone down! Ash ran back toward the throne platform. The circle of white light filled every last corner of the octagonal hall, quickly swelled toward the vaulted ceiling. It wrapped everything in its brilliant energy, briefly illuminating the shapes of people and creatures before dancing in the air shattered, losing their forms in the light. The force of the explosion knocked Yuri to the floor. She had taken Ash's warning to heart. Her eyes were still tightly closed. Above her head, the creature screamed. Oddly enough, with their eyes closed, they sounded different than they had before. They sound almost human. She heard the voices of men weeping in pain and sadness, screaming with rage and terror. Not monsters, they're people, Yuri heard herself shout. She opened her eyes. The world around her was made of white light. Then Ash was beside her, slapping a gloved hand over her eyes and pulling her under the flap of his cloak. There was another explosion. The floor of the hall shook. The screams rose in pitch and intensity. There's a little break, and I actually realized I'm really fucking thirsty, so I'm gonna take a sip of my drink. So how are y'all? I hope y'all are nice and cozy today. Okay. Here we go, that's some good sipping. Yuri came to. It seemed she had been unconscious for a short while. She was lying on the hard stone floor. Ash knelt behind her, propping her head up. His hand was no longer over her eyes. Ash breathed a long sigh. Good work, he said, giving Yuri a pat on the head. Silence had returned to the hall. Half of the candles in the sconces set around the hall had gone out. Something like white ash covered entire sections of the wall. The floor was littered with burnt torch holders. Yuri looked up at the ceiling. The royal crest was gone. The ceiling had fallen, revealing the utter darkness beyond. Still, within the hall, it was light. It took Yuri a moment to realize that the main source of light was herself, more specifically, her forehead. The glyph was shining more brightly than it ever had before. Not like a candle or a torch or even a searchlight. It was like a warm light that illuminated everything in the room, evenly from all directions. Yet it all came from her. You okay, Yuri? Aichi poked his head out from Ash's pocket. Yuri wondered when he had slipped in there. How about you, Sky? Can you stand? Sky was lying on the floor, behind Yuri, curled up like a sleeping child. The knight's sword lay on the ground next to him. The arm that had been gripping it, and the knight that arm belonged to, were gone. This place has been purified, Ash said softly. Look, Parveen II is gone as well. Only the tattered cloak hung over the throne. Sky, are you okay? Did you get hurt? Let me see. Yuri stood and reached for him. When her hand touched the devout's shoulder, something like sparks shot up from his body, giving her a shock. Yuri stepped back, her eyes wide. Sky crawled away from her and pressed his back against the stone wall at the far end of the dais. Purple eyes were filled with a terror so intense Yuri found herself unable to speak. Did I do something? Nothing. What's wrong, Sky? The devout's terror was catching. Yuri's throat was dry. Ash stood, throwing back his cloak and stepping up beside her. Sky was still in the throes of fear, his eyes wide, his lips trembling. What are you? Ash completed the devout's question, his voice as sharp as his sword. What did you see just now in the light? Though he did not blink, something in Sky's eyes was turning. The eyes shone with light, then went dark. There was something reflected in them, not from the outside world, but from his heart. Whatever it was too small for Yuri to see clearly. Sky clenched one hand into a fist, began to beat his own chest. The expression did not change, yet he kept striking himself, meting out punishment. With each strike, his head jerked backwards, striking the wall behind him, while he stammered, I. Yuri dashed forward and grabbed Sky's hand. There were no sparks this time. His skin felt icy cold against hers. It's nothing, Sky whispered, though he sounded on the verge of tears. Delicately, he removed Yuri's fingers, gingerly nudging her hand away as though it were some fragile object. He looked up at Ash. We're going further in, yes? Let us be off. Ash nodded and turned. Behind him, Sky stood, bracing himself against the wall for balance. He put a hand to his chest and rubbed it where he had been hitting himself only moments before. With the exception of Ash, none of them were familiar with the palace in the least. It was now an advantage, it seemed, since they would not be misled by memories twisted into distractions by the incredible changes that had been wrought to the geography of the place. Not only was nothing where it was supposed to be, but rooms were connected to rooms in the most haphazard and unconventional ways, as though the giant hands had reached in and scrambled the palace interior, heedless of left and right or up and down. There were stairs stuck in odd places, and corridors that wrapped back around on themselves. The one thing they could count on was the threat of dust creatures around nearly every corner. Yuri quickly got used to the weight of the mace swinging in her hands. With each encounter felt an increasing knights in shredded armor, though occasionally they found a minister in courtly robes, or a woman in a long dress. On one occasion, they found a man lying on the ground, still breathing, though only faintly. He did not stir when they called to him. When Yuri tried using her glyph, Ash stopped her. Think it's far too late for that. Again and again this happened. They'd find a new room, defeat what creatures lay in wait by the entrance or that came storming up from the dark corner, and then Yuri, Ash, and Sky would look around inside at the scattered corpses in the vain hope of finding a survivor. Why would Kirik do something like this? Yuri asked, her breath short, not due to the constant exertions of battle, but with frustration. What possible meaning could any of this have? Killing people, then mutating them into monsters, just as pursuers can finish them off? It's all conflict, isn't it? Ash said. He was in front, but spoke without glancing back. Furthermore, this is not Kirik's fault. This is the work of the King in Yellow. But isn't Kirik at the King in Yellow's heart? Yuri insisted. He is, together with your brother. Say, Aju cut in with a high, squeaky voice. I thought a search party came through here before us. Funny we haven't run into them. Maybe they're just up ahead? Which way would that be? Yuri wondered out loud, voicing the thought in everyone's mind. They reached yet another dead end. The ceiling in this chamber was high, though nothing on the scale of the throne room. Smooth, cold walls surrounded them on four sides. The floor was littered with bodies of various creatures. There was only the door through which they had entered and the small slit high up on the wall to the right-hand side, with no visible means for reaching it. The search party must have fought here, been victorious, and continued on. But which way? Looks like we go back, Yuri sighed. Then she heard someone calling out in a weak voice. Four of them turned, looking to see where it might have come from. Is someone there? Voices coming from that slit in the wall. One of the search party, Ash said. He looked up and raised his voice. There is a wall between us. You cannot get through. How do you get where you are? There was no immediate answer. Yuri imagined a man wounded lying on the other side. I have to get to him quickly. The wall, came the voice again. It is enchanted. Ash slightly rapped the wall with one fist and turned to Yuri. Knock it all down. Yuri put a hand to the glyph on her forehead and turned it toward the wall. In that instant, a giant gray slab of rock stretching up in front of her vanished like a mirage, opening up an entire vista beyond. Aju clung tightly to the back of Yuri's neck. Even Ash seemed startled. For a moment, Yuri thought they had somehow returned to the Katahar Abbey ruins. They were staring at a giant mountain of rubble. The room containing it all was enormous, with another high ceiling and chunks of stone and plaster piled high to the very top. Yuri looked up and spied something glimmering there. They all saw it. Crown, Ash said. It's Harvain II's crown. The owner of the weak voice they had heard was sitting at the foot of the mountain of rubble, his legs splayed out in front of him. He was not a knight. He wore clothes similar to Ash's, with black hair falling over a young face. His cloak had been badly torn. Part of his chest seemed oddly crumpled inward, like a dented sheet of metal. He was bleeding. Yuri ran up to him, and the young man attempted to smile. You are a wizard, little girl. Good on you. My partner couldn't even make a scratch on that damned wall. Try to sit still. I'll fix you up. He knelt down, noticing that one of the man's legs had been torn apart, leaving a little flesh by the knee. Did you see what did this to you? Ash asked over Yuri's shoulder, while she sat there, trying to decide where to start in mending the man. I did not, for it was invisible. It went down there, the man said, pointing toward the rubble with a trembling finger. This wreckage is what's left after it devoured the palace. This here is the leavings this thing spat out. Ash walked across the room, examining the rubble as he went. Interesting. He tapped a pile of stones with the pommel of his sword. There appears to be more room beneath this one, as though it were hollow. Here, it's a way down. Yuri applied the light of her glyph to the man over and over, but the bleeding would not stop. She had just managed to mend one wound, only to have a fresh one open beside it. Give it up, little one. It's too late for me. You be quiet. It's not too late. You're an undertaker too, I see, the man said to Ash. The wolf nodded. My partner, Narg's his name. He's a wizard. Couldn't handle that wall he just took out, though. He went down the hole by himself. I might find out that way. The man attempted another smile. You're really going down there. You'll save him for me, won't you? That we shall, Ash said quickly. Did any others descend deeper? Some nights, the man rasped. He began to cough violently, each spasm leaving blood-flecked spittle on his lips. First patrol. We were in the second. No one's come back. Ash, stop making him talk, Yuri protested. But the man took her hand in his own, gently pushed it down. Two of his fingers were broken, the nails ripped clean off. The young man stared at Ash. Be careful, he whispered. Its voice. I heard it. It has no shape, but it can speak, he coughed. It spoke with the voice of a child. Boy. Yuri froze. A boy no older than this little one here, the man added, his eyes losing their focus as he spoke. His head slumped to one side as he continued his tale, more weakly now. Reminded me of my little brother, it did. Ash stepped up beside him and knelt on one knee. What did this boy say to you? The man turned to Ash, summoning the very last of his strength to do so. His lips parted, and a trickle of blood spilled from them. He was laughing. He was happy. He said he was going to make the world beautiful. Get rid of all the filth that's messing it up. And he paused, catching his breath. And he said no one's going to stop him. The man's head slumped forward. Yuri looked at his still open eyes and realized that the life had fled them. Her own eyes were stinging with tears. What can I do? What is there to do? Yuri trembled and could not stop for some time. It was my brother, Yuri said, a taste of iron on her lips. My own heart is bruised and bleeding. Pretty soon it'll break and I'll be coughing up blood just like this poor dead man. The king in yellow is using my brother's voice. Yuri swayed and nearly fell, catching herself on the floor with both hands at the last moment. Body convulsed like she was vomiting, and a sob came from her mouth. No crying, Yuri, Audrey squeaked in a high voice from the top of her head. No crying, stand up. The little mouse yanked on her hair as hard as he could, but Yuri felt no pain. She wiped her tears, sat up, slapped her face several times with her hands, and lifted her eyes at a world blurred by sorrow. She could see them. Ash standing there like a hungry ghost, and Sky all in black, even thinner than the wolf. Until now, whenever Yuri had broken down, it had always been Sky who ran to her first. Now he shrank away, frightened, clutching his black robes tightly to his chest and staring at her. Their eyes met for only an instant, before he quickly looked away. Ash set down the grimy sack he carried, pulled out a coil of rope, and asked, Ever rappel down something? Why would I have done something like that? Yuri snorted. Ash lifted an eyebrow and told her, It's a lot easier going down than it is going up. And softly, you can close his eyes now. There's another break, so I'm gonna take another sip, because who knows when I'll get another. Man, thanks for heating up. Stairs led down the mountain of rubble. The steps crafted from seemingly random collections of rock and sand, as if whatever exterior force had pounded the earth here had caused it to fracture just so, creating descending ledges. Several of the steps were taller even than Yuri herself, so she had to clamber down. Sometimes the skies helped. It was very dark. Ash and Sky had both discarded their torches as they needed their hands free to navigate the steps. Only the light of Yuri's glyph lit their way, like a spelunker's headlamp. The light it cast cut a perfect circle out of the gloom, so that whichever direction Yuri wasn't facing was plunged in utter darkness. Yuri had been under so much tension for so long that now her tears had completely dried. She was even beginning to think, as she listened to her own ragged breath, that her chest was heaving only with the exertion of their descent, and not the pain she felt in her heart. Yet the wound in her heart still ached and bled, partly because of her brother's voice, and partly because of Sky's increasingly odd behavior. He had always been there right by her side before. Now she had to turn around to find him, somewhere back in the darkness behind her. She had always been able to sense him before, too, even when he did not speak, but now it felt like Sky was intentionally trying to disappear, out of sight and out of mind. What did you see in the light? Ash's questioned to Sky. He hadn't answered. He had hit himself, like he was punishing himself for something. Then he urged the party on, so nothing had changed. What do you see in the light of my glyph, Sky? What did you... Sorry. Did what you see do this? Did it draw you further away from me? What was it? The question spun around inside her head, and Yuri had to screw her mouth shut tightly to keep them from spilling out. Going down the rough-hewn steps felt less like a descent, more like sinking into the depths. They met no more creatures on their dishearteningly long and dangerous way down. When they had reached what appeared to be the bottom, Yuri noticed that the ground was hard and level, in a way that none of the many steps above them had been. The walls, illuminated by Yuri's glyph, had clearly been man-made. We seem to be in some kind of underground complex, Ash said. I'm sure in the past there were proper paths down here from the palace, but the force that did this damage chose none of those paths, instead preferring to simply open a hole to the ground. From Yuri's shoulder, Aji squeaked. I think that room up top with all the rubble is a prayer hall of some sort. I spotted an altar and some fragments of religious-looking paintings. That would make it the royal family's private chapel. Makes sense. We would want to destroy that first, Ash said, unwilling to call it by its proper name. Behind him was an impassable wall of wreckage. No way to go but forward. Yuri fixed her grip on her mace. They began walking by the light of the glyph, and small bits of plaster rained down on their heads from the darkness above. Ash extended an arm, barring Yuri's path. There we go. I can read. Walk carefully. The impact that destroyed the palace has left its mark here. Yuri nodded, swinging her head to give them a better view of their surroundings. She found a crack in one wall, fallen sconce, and broken candles. This place was once lit like the rooms above. The corridor was flat and wide enough for two to walk abreast, yet it turned frequently, always at a right angle, following a pattern. They would come to a right turn, which led to an intersection where they went straight, only to come to a left turn. This happened over and over. The labyrinth, Yuri muttered. An inverted swastika, actually, Aji chirped, his voice filled with unusual confidence. A manji to you, Yuri. Isn't that right, Ash? It is. Not bad for an Ankawi dictionary. Thanks, Aji replied coolly. But you're both right. The labyrinth made up of manji, the ancient symbol for eternity and cosmic balance. Not a labyrinth in the sense of a maze, so much as a labyrinth in the sense of a spiritual path, said Ash. What's that mean? Like the path one walks to visit a grave, he explained, a sense of urgency in his voice. And I am sure that, as its terminus in the center of the labyrinth, we'll find the grave of the mage Elim, whose symbol the Manji is. After a pause, he added, to be more precise, it was a symbol of those who worshipped her. Though Elim did not take on a single disciple during her life, there were many in the Hatelands whom she had saved with her power and knowledge. It was only a matter of time before some began to worship her as an apostle of the Creator. Though not on a large enough scale to be considered a proper sect, her followers gathered to her, assisted in her research, and joined her on her many travels. The followers of Elim bore the mark of the Manji upon the palms of their hands. That's all very fine and well, Yuri said. Why'd they have to go and make this whole labyrinth? Probably to keep Elim from leaving easily. Archie suggested. This is how the royal family of the Hatelands held Elim here beneath the palace. Only they would have known the proper path for winding their way through. They turned, walked, and went straight for a while, and turned again. As they went, the walls around them gradually began to change. They were wider here and brighter, adorned with murals, faded and crumbling from the walls, with parts that were still visible. Most of the paintings depicted people. They were young and old, men and women, standing in orderly lines. All of them wore hooded white robes, their heads bowed reverently, with both hands held up by their chests. Yuri could make out the inverted swastikas on several of them. And images of her followers were placed along the walls of the labyrinth to quell Elim's restless spirit, Ash said, with a sneer, quickening his pace. We're nearing the center. Here we'll find Elim, and something of Kirik's buried with her, be it a possession or a body part. Though they lived at different times, both mages were guilty of the same sin. Elim had planted the roots of it, and Kirik had caused the sin to bloom like an evil flower. In other words, we're headed right where it went, Ash said. They soon came upon the bodies of many other fallen knights, their vacant stares underscoring Ash's words. Some had their armor stripped from them and rent to pieces. Yuri was saddened, but she did not slow her pace. I wonder if the mage friend of that man we saw at the top of the stairs made it any further, Yuri asked. No sooner had she said that than a blood-curdling scream split the darkness ahead. Ash ran forward without a moment's hesitation, while Yuri stood rooted to the spot for a breath before following after. Then she stopped again, and this time it was of her own volition. Sky? Sky was hugging the wall, terrified by the scream. He slid to the ground before her. You're not going? Will you wait here? Forehead to the wall. Sky slumped, then shook his head. No, I'll go. Let's go then. Yuri held out a hand. Sky looked away. I will go. But you must stay here, Lady Yuri. Please wait here. What? Don't be ridiculous. I can't stay here. Yuri had just about had it. Whatever. Do what you like. He dashed off down the corridor, feet stomping on the ground. He was just around the next corner when something sleek slid through the air. She reflexively swatted at it with her mace. The corridor had grown suddenly wider. Darkness was less complete. Getting close. Yuri blinked and saw that most of the open space she had come to was filled with one particular large creature. In form, it greatly resembled the thing that had appeared outside the library at Hiroki School. But this one had legs, 2 of them, each with sharp claws. Above them hung a misshapen lump of a body, in which tentacles grew in every direction, making it impossible to tell which way the thing was facing. They even had a face. Yuri recalled the creature whom she had met deep beneath the Katahara Abbey ruins, the one that had once been Ichiro Minochi. The creature was bleeding green blood. Ash had already severed several of its tentacles with his two-handed sword. Still, it was clinging to something. A man. His arms and legs hanging limp. His head flopped on the end of his bent neck. The monster held it aloft with many of its remaining tentacles, holding the body high over the ground and not letting go. From the robe he wore, Yuri guessed this was the mage. "Let him go!" At Yuri's shout, the creature shifted perceptibly. It stamped on the ground with its two legs. "I said, let him go, you fiend!" Whoever it was, it seemed to understand her words. The creature complied, flinging the mage toward her. Yuri and Ash dodged aside, a spray of green and red blood splattering their cheeks. The creature lashed out with another tentacle. Ash leapt between it and Yuri, while Yuri readied her mace and took a deep breath. He placed her left hand to the glyph on her forehead. The glyph began to shine. Lifting the glow in her hand, Yuri roared, Unclean gatekeeper, open the way to us!" Platinum light streaked from her hand across the room. Audrey squeaked, shutting his eyes against the glare. Even Ash raised his arms to shield his eyes. Yuri stood, head up, unfaltering. In the space of a breath, the creature was gone. Even the severed tentacles that had been leaking green blood on the floor evaporated. "Where did you learn those words?" Yuri lowered her mace and answered, "Glyph told me." "I see," Ash sighed. "It was a gatekeeper. Gatekeeper to the graveyard. Watcher over Kirik." Yuri and Ash walked abreast into the space the creature had left behind. They were in a large circular hall, in the very center of which rose a circular dais, topped by a pair of crosses laid across one another. They were crosses like the ones in Yuri's region, but she had never seen crosses arranged like this at home. Crosses she knew would have been driven into the ground like stakes. "Grave of the Mage Elam," Ash said in a hushed voice. "Look at the walls," Audrey squeaked. Images of Elam's followers had been drawn here too. They surrounded the graves, each with the mark of the Manji on their hands. "Why is it so light in here?" There were holders for torches and sconces scattered around, but none of them were lit. Yuri tried covering the glyph on her forehead with her hand, but the light in the hall did not lessen. It wasn't her glyph that was lighting it. It must have been another source. Then she saw that a faint light, a thin golden mist, shimmering like the air sometimes does in the summer, was coming from behind the crosses. And then the mist sat up. It was the only way she could describe it. Even though the mist wasn't shaped like a person or an animal, it moved like one. Yuri realized that Ash was holding his breath. "Who are you?" he asked, finally, his voice even and composed. "No. Let me rephrase that. Who are you here and now?" Yuri still had her hand over her glyph. Light spilled out from between her fingers. Not a warm glow like before, but sharp rays of radiance that stabbed like blades at the golden mist beyond the crosses. Several of the rays pierced the mist. With each ray that penetrated it, the mist began to coalesce, its outline taking shape. Yuri stood watching it, her mouth hanging open. The golden mist was transforming into the shape of a person. Yuri saw that it wore long robes flowing elegantly from its shoulders, like those of a person of noble nature. The figure was facing her. "Yuri," Audrey whispered, his tiny body shivering where he hid in the collar of her vestments. "Don't be scared, Yuri. It can't do anything to you. It can't touch you." Yuri wasn't frightened by the sight, though. She was entranced. She understood how this figure could steal men's hearts, how all who faced it fell under its spell. Just like my brother had. It was the hero. This was the source of that wild energy that had broken from its prison and descended upon the circle, a subject of devotion and adoration wrapped in tremendous brilliance. Then the shining hero reached forward with one hand, touching one of the crosses upon the dais, gently slid it off, lifted the cross lightly above its own head, and tossed it over its back. Ash raised his sword and charged, but the hero simply lifted one hand, and Ash was knocked back as if struck by some invisible whip. He flew through the air and landed at Yuri's feet. Ash was up on its own feet again, where she could help him. Yuri stood, transfixed. She remembered what she had seen on that summer night so long ago. Her brother bowing his head before a figure in a long cape. Yuri! Yuri! Aju swatted Yuri's cheeks with a tiny paw and thrust his cold nose into hers. Into her ear. Snap out of it, Yuri! Yuri felt the strength leave from her limbs. Her hands fell limp by her sides. The mace had almost slipped out of her grasp when she realized it, and lifted again to defend herself. Ash charged once more, and the hero knocked him away. It was playing with him. While it tossed Ash around with the slightest motions of its fingers, the hero lightly lifted up the other crosses and tossed them against the wall. The shattered pieces fell with a racket. Kirik, Ash groaned, falling to one knee. You're Kirik. Remember the man you were. Remember how you once raised your sword to defend the oppressed. Even though the shining outline in front of them had no face, Yuri was sure that the hero was smiling. I have no name. Its voice was neither that of a man nor a woman. It was neither old nor young. It was unlike any voice she had heard before, and yet tugged at her memory. The forgotten whisper of a story she had heard as a child. I am no one and no thing. That mean it was nothing? Is that even possible? How could nothing possess such oppressive power? How could nothing shine with such radiant beauty? Let me change the question, Ash shouted, spitting blood. Why are you here? The hero lifted its hand in front of its face. All happens according to the will of the circle, it replied in a weighty voice. Then clapping its hands together, it thrust its arms into the dais where the two crosses had lain. White light suffused the chamber. The ground shook like something deep below the surface was awakening, rushing up toward the hero. And the hero was waiting for it. Then the tremor that had been deep underground reached the surface. The glowing outline of the hero began to swell. Maintaining its human shape, it expanded to giant proportions. The ground trembled violently, cracks appearing in the rock beneath their feet, and pieces of the ceiling and walls began to break free and fall to the floor of the labyrinth. Kirik, stop this! Ash shouted, but he could not move. Neither of them could take so much as a step toward the hero. A circle of incredible energy had surrounded it and was beginning to expand. Yuri had fallen to the ground when it shook, and as she found herself pushed backward across the rattling stones, as though driven by a powerful wind, back toward the entrance. Ash, too, was steadily being driven back from the grave. Sky, where are you? Yuri shouted, her voice almost a scream. There was no answer. The force pushed her further back. Her vestments of protection fluttered around her violently, whipping in the wind. She was afraid the buttons would snap off. This was no wind, no natural flow of the air. There was an incredible energy erupting from the ground, clearing the gravesite, pushing away all the clutter, including Yuri and Ash. Can't hold on. Ah! Aju squealed as the force pulled him away from Yuri's collar and sent him spinning into the air. Yuri reached out a hand to grab him, but the force pushed down on her with an incredible weight, pinning her to the floor. She would have swept away herself if Ash's hand hadn't caught her ankle. He had managed to hold his ground, clutching the grip of his short sword he had thrust into the hard-packed floor with his other hand. Grab on! He extended his empty hand. Yuri couldn't reach, and everything was still. The flow of power ceased. The rumbling in the earth quieted. The light spilled from the grave began to recede. Yuri lifted her head. Ash gave his own head a shake and sat up. Then they saw it. The hero had grown until its head reached the ceiling over the grave. It appeared even more human now. Its face, perfectly smooth before, now had 2 eyes. There were no pupils, no distinction between the whites in the center of those eyes. They were just open pools of inky darkness in the shape of eyes. Though they were dark, they seemed to shine with even more strength and pride than the rest of the hero. A new power roiled in their depths. That's what you left here, Kirik, Ash said, his voice a rasping lament. Your eyes. And the hero had retrieved them. Now the hero looked out on the hateful into Kirik's eyes, once again able to see the breadth of the circle it so desired to fill. Yuri stood in a daze, entranced once again by the hero's sheer presence. Wonder what those black shining eyes see, she thought. Wonder what the circle looks like to it. Little thing. Seed of my being. That was another voice. One not her own, in her head. There you are, the hero said. Yuri blinked, coming to her senses. What is it saying? Who is it calling to? Not me or Ash. It was Sky. He was there, walking past Ash, stepping over Yuri, who was still lying where she had fallen on the ground. Sky's robes gently swayed as he approached the hero. They had fallen loose, revealing one emaciated shoulder. Sky walked as though intoxicated. He took a step, and one of his legs bent. Instead of straightening himself, he merely toppled over. Still, the devout did not stop. The hero was drawing him in. No, Sky, don't go to it. You must stop, Yuri shouted. But Sky did not so much as glance in her direction. Standing shakily, he stepped inside the light and surrounded the hero in a glimmering aura. There, he fell to his knees and bowed to the ground. The hero's light washed over the devout's thin body. Yuri held her breath. Even her heart stood still. Everything stopped. Oh, this can't be happening. I don't believe it. Enveloped in the hero's aura, Sky was ceasing to be. His black robes melted in the light, and a bright glow swallowed his shaven head. The last glimpse of him Yuri caught were his leather sandals worn from the long journey and those knobby ankle bones. And the Sky was completely gone. Lying on the ground in his place was Hiroki Murasaki, Yuri's brother, Yuriko's brother. Yuri put a hand to her mouth. Hiroki Murasaki lifted his head. She recognized him. Everything about him. The arch of his back, his legs, the back of his neck. He was wearing a school uniform. The soles of his favorite sneakers were coated with blood. The blood of the classmates who bullied him. He stepped in their blood as he fled. Don't look around, Yuri shouted in her heart. Don't let me see your face. Hiroki turned. Tears streaked his cheeks. His lips trembled. Yuriko. And the ground shuddered, and a laugh erupted, shaking the walls and the ceiling of the burial chamber. The hero was laughing. The king in yellow was laughing. The dregs of my vessel, you may have it if you wish. The laughter grew louder and louder still. The hero was shining ever more brightly, boiling with light like a sun going nova. No! Yuri screamed, and Hiroki stood. For a second, Yuri thought he would come to her, and might run to her side. But he did not. He only looked at her with his tear-streaked face, a look that lasted for only the space of a breath. I'm sorry, she heard her brother say. Definitely her brother's voice. His words. Goodbye. He waved. His fingers were caked with blood. Then Hiroki turned, ran to the hero, and dove headfirst into its light. The light swallowed him, and he evaporated. The hero gave a last triumphant laugh, and the burial chamber began to collapse. No, Hiroki! No! 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 Yuri made a dash after him, but Ash grabbed her and held her tight. The ground heaved and cracked, sending them flying into the air, while around them the walls began to crumble. The hero rose, levitating over the burial chamber, its light and power spread, swallowing them. Use your glyph, Ash shouted. But Yuri, still crying out for her brother, could not hear him. Ash forcibly grabbed Yuri's hand, putting it to her forehead. The hero took flight. At that moment, the ceiling of the burial chamber fragmented and fell. The two tiny shapes left behind vanished. Darkness swallowed Yuri. It felt like they had resisted an incredible gravitational pull at the last moment. Now she and Ash were hurtling through the void. She could feel the power receding from them, its beauty, its brilliance. The hero left them, trailing a wake of light through the darkness after it. It was like everything she had ever wanted, her brother, had jumped onto a comet and sped off into space, leaving her behind. Images of her brother flickered through Yuri's mind as she flew, one after the other, like photographs in an album. All pictures of his face, smiling, scolding, angry, worried. Goodbye. How could he say that? Her only brother. After all she had been through to find him? After all her searching? And he had been with her the whole way. How had she not noticed? Why hadn't she been able to recognize him? A shock ran through her body. Ash's arm around her. Yuri was ejected from the void onto solid ground. They were back in the Nameless Land. She was sprawled in the same spot where she had arrived when she traveled here, the magic circle in Ichiro Minochi's reading room. Yuri managed to get her arms beneath her and lifted herself up. He stood. Giving her head a shake, she turned to where the lights of the Hall of All Books flickered in the distance. There he is. Ahead of them, a single nameless devout in black robes was running toward the hall, occasionally tripping and falling to his knees, only to stand again and continue running. Hiroki! Sky! Yuri broke into a run. Her vestments were practically coming off now, and where they wrapped around her limbs, they only seemed to get in the way. She slipped and fell, banging her knees on the ground, shouting all the while, chasing after the devout. The nameless devout never looked back at her. He simply ran and ran, running away from her. He's not Hiroki anymore. He's not Sky anymore. Wait! Wait! No matter how fast Yuri ran, she couldn't catch up. Ahead of her, the nameless devout disappeared inside the outer wall of the Hall of All Books. Still, Yuri ran. Search the whole place, and I'll find him. I'll drag him out of there, I swear it, and we'll go home together. Yuri's exhausted legs would no longer listen to her. She staggered, tripped, and fell, and stood up only to fall again. She was clutching the grass, trying to stand again, but she felt Ash's hand on her shoulder. It's no use. Give him up. Yuri looked toward the hall, gritting her teeth. She felt that if she didn't keep her mouth shut, she'd bite out Ash's throat, so full of anger she was, so full of hatred. He is once again a nameless devout. He does not remember you. He does not retain even a fragment of the individual known as Hiroki Murasaki. He had become no one, nowhere. It is better that way. It's better. Yuri's hand lashed out on its own, slapping Ash's cheek. The wolf didn't even blink. You knew, Yuri said. You knew and you didn't tell me. That's why it was always so cold to Sky. Why didn't you tell me? If I had, would you have believed me? Would that have satisfied you? Ash slowly shook his head. Neither you nor he would have believed it, till you both faced the truth with your own eyes. My words would have had no more meaning to you than the wind that blows across this nameless land. He's right, Yuri thought, though it vexed her to no end. Ash was always right. Yuri thought to slap him again, but the strength had left her hand. Tears welled in her eyes. How many times have I cried already? How many times had Ash laughed at her for being a crybaby? But she had never cried like this. Cried tears that seemed to scorch her own cheeks. The nameless devout you named Sky was incomplete, Ash said, kneeling on one knee beside the weeping Yuri. His hair was disheveled, chiseled face of as white as his ashen hair. And an incomplete devout is a danger both to the nameless land and to the circle. That is why we could not leave him to his own devices. Someone had to purify him, Ash explained. That was the reason for your glyph. That was the reason for your journey. Ash extended a hand to her. Stand up. Let us go to the Hall of All Books. In the Dome of Convocation, you may see with your own eyes all that you have accomplished. That's the end of chapter 13. So we're at the final chapter. Let me take some more sips. Chapter 14. The Truth. The Dome of Convocation lay silent in the deep night of the Nameless Land. The whole place seemed much darker than it had during Yuri's last visit. Even the torches seemed to burn in shadow. The Archdevout was waiting in the middle of the circular dais that Yuri had, on occasion on her first visit, thought looked like a sumo dohyo of some sort. The casket containing the Book of Heroes, the Hollow Book, was there as well. Next to it, 4 nameless devout stood at attention. When they saw that Yuri arrived, all the devout swept aside their black robes and knelt on the floor. A little unsteadily, Yuri made her way to the center of the dais. She approached the casket, its surface carved with innumerable symbols. Her eyes could see them all, and her feet could feel the solid floor beneath her. But Yuri felt nothing. She had no sense of anything. Even distances seemed fluid and changing to her now. Ash touched Yuri's shoulder, indicating that they should stop. She brought her feet together, steadied her breath for a moment, then announced to the nameless devout, "I'm back." The Archdevout lifted his face. First he nodded to Ash. Then his eyes went to Yuri. "We have been waiting for you." And the eyes in that wrinkled face were dry, told Yuri nothing. Though surely he must have noticed her tears. There was no consolation in them, or any regret that Yuri could see. His eyes were black and deep as the darkness outside. Next to Yuri, Ash spoke. "All cast. Go to the casket." Yuri did not move. Her body felt like a giant sandbag, with a small rip at the bottom, through which sand streamed, leaving her to empty out on the floor. Her glyph has served its purpose, and now returns to its rightful place. This ritual is necessary to close the Hollow Book. Step forward, Ash said again. His voice was gentle. His words a request, not a demand. Yuri took a hesitant step forward. The Archdevout righted himself, and shuffled up to the casket on his knees and bowed again. Moving as one, the 4 nameless devout went to the corners of the casket, inserted metal poles in the rings, and opened the lid. Reverently, the Archdevout lifted the hollow book from its resting place. Then he shuffled away from the casket still on his knees, and held the book out before Yuri. "Look upon it." Yuri blinked. The cover of the hollow book bore a glyph. Though faint, Yuri could see it was the same as the mark on her forehead. The image was worn almost to the point of illegibility. The lines of the design were broken in places, like someone had tried to scratch it on with pen that was running out of ink. Take it in your hands. Yuri did as she was told, picking up the hollow book in both hands. Her fingers were dirty from the hill soil, and there was black mud beneath her torn fingernails. The book felt incredibly light in her hands, almost weightless, like it wasn't really there. The glyph on Yuri's forehead began to give off a white light. Yuri started and tilted her head back away from it, but the Archdevout commanded, "Stay as you are. The glyph will now leave you." The glow from the glyph on her forehead grew stronger, till the circle of light it cast enveloped her hands and the book. Then the faded glyph on the book's cover began to absorb the light, its own glow increasing. First the outside arc, then the details grew more pronounced, the lines thickening with brilliant light. The glyph's returning where it came from. Yuri's eyes grew wider as she sensed the transfer of power and the light that streamed from her into the hollow book. Though the light was bright, it was not harshly so, nor was there any heat. It was simply pure light. When the glyph upon the book was finally complete, the one on Yuri's forehead dimmed and went dark. Only at that moment did the hollow book suddenly feel heavy in her hands, faintly warm to the touch. Now the glyph on the book was beginning to fade, as its power was integrated into the book itself, filling its pages with its power and light. When the glyph had entirely disappeared from the cover, the only light inside the dome of convocation came from the flickering torches set around it. The Archdevout gently lifted the hollow book from Yuri's hands and solemnly returned it to the casket. Then the four nameless devout replaced the lid of the casket, bowed in unison, and passed their metal poles through the rings at the four corners, and lifted the casket to their shoulders. They walked out of the dome, their black robes honestly sweeping the floor. "Where will they put it?" Yuri asked, her voice clear, even though the proceedings had rendered her mute for some time. Before that, she had been screaming and crying herself hoarse. "Deep within the Hall of All Books," the Archdevout replied. "We will guard it until such time it can be sealed once again." Ash stepped up and bowed his head. The Archdevout bowed back twice as deeply. Yuri touched her forehead with her hand. It was smooth. No white light shone upon her fingers. The glyph was gone. So what do you want to know first?" Asha asked. He straightened from his bow and turned to Yuri. The steel tacks on the soles of his boots clicked on the stone floor. The Archdevout stepped back to stand by the wolf's side. "What?" Yuri muttered, feeling dizzy. The sandbag that was her body was nearly empty now. "I don't understand anything. I don't even know where to begin." The only thing she did know was that Sky was gone. That Sky had been her brother. How stupid I am for not realizing it. The bell tolled, and Ash suddenly looked up toward the ceilings of the dome. The Archdevout joined him. It rang once, rested, then rang twice before resting again. This pattern repeated 3 times before the bell was still, but the sound echoed through the dome for some time. Yuri had her first question. "What was that bell for?" "That was the 3rd bell," Ash said, his eyes cast downward, his head cocked, listening to the fading echoes. "It tells us that the gate has closed." "The gate to the Hall of All Books?" Ash opened his eyes and slowly shook his head. "No, this gate has a different meaning." Something about the word tugged at the back of Yuri's mind. He had heard it used before in some unusual way, but where? Ash was staring into Yuri's eyes. It occurred to her that the reason he always seemed to know what she was wondering, that he knew things she didn't. and it hid them from her. That's why he's always one step ahead. Of course, the intense gaze of his, maybe he really is reading my thoughts. I've heard of this gate before, I think. You have. I remember it myself, Ash said, nodding, with a smile flashed across his face. Whether it was a cold smile of an uncaring heart, or a wry smile of regret, Yuri could not tell. When he asked me what it meant before, it took me some effort to make up something I could tell you. When was that? Yuri thought, picking through her memories, but she soon gave up. She was exhausted. Let me explain it to you from the beginning, then, the wolf offered. This will take some time. You might want to sit. Yuri slumped down on the spot, hugging her knees. She would have been perfectly happy to sit there for an eternity and never move again. Then the archdevout walked over, sat silently down beside her, like a kindly grandfather come to console a distraught grandchild after she had received a scolding from her parents for some trifling infraction. It was a gesture filled with gentleness and warmth. The only difference between that kindly grandfather and the archdevout was the way he sat, with his black robes tucked neatly beneath his knees. You must be angry, he said. Though his eyes were still dry, there were tears in the archdevout's voice. I will not ask for your forgiveness. We sent you forth knowing full well what awaited you. We set you on this path, your bags packed with nothing but lies and subterfuge, while we kept the truth to ourselves. Yuri marveled at how calm she felt. She had been so furious just a short while ago, and now she wanted only to bury her head in the archdevout's robes and cry. In order for the hero to break free, the person must serve as the last vessel, Ash began, turning his face slightly toward Yuri's. In order to return the hero to the flow of the stories, thus bringing it back to this land where it can be bound, it is necessary to drain the power from the last vessel who resides within the hero. Only the All-Cast, whose veins flow the same blood as that of the last vessel, can hope to accomplish this. Why? Why? Because only the All-Cast voice may reach the last vessel. When that voice cannot be heard, neither will the hero know the power of the glyph. Thus does the All-Cast join the hunt for the hero, the King in Yellow. This is when the Book of Heroes becomes marked with the same glyph that marks the All-Cast's forehead. If All-Cast should be successful in finding the hero when the last vessel is released, then the All-Cast returns to this place. The mark upon the forehead and the glyph upon the book become one, and the hollow book is filled once again. Ash looked directly at Yuri. All of this is true. And all of this you were told before you began your journey, more or less. Wolf spread his hands looking for her acknowledgement. Yuri nodded. That's what I expected my journey to bring, more or less. Next door, the archdevout's face was lowered. Yet, rarely, extremely rarely, things do not go according to plan. Ash paused and asked her, what do you think becomes of the vessels? Aren't they absorbed by the hero? Used as energy or something? That's right. They fuse with the hero, becoming a part of it. The hero only takes them in the first place because they fulfill all the requirements. They possess great anger and equally great desire to express that anger. This desire calls out to the hero. Yet once it has absorbed these vessels, nothing is left. Not even the anger which drove them in the first place. Ash licked his lips before continuing. There is one exception, however. The last vessel. For the last vessel serves as both vessel and summoner. The summoner is the one who calls the hero, the one who gives form to the hero. You might call them a conspirator. Conspiring with the hero is a sin. Thus, even if the vessel loses their human form, the sin they committed remains. Now, Yuri, what shape do you think that sin takes? Yuri didn't have to think long. even as the details refused to come into clear focus in her mind. She knew the answer to the question her heart had been asking since her journey had begun. Nameless devout. Ash nodded deeply. All last vessels, without exception, become nameless devout. And here, in this land, they do penance for their sin. All that remained of them was sin. They retained none of their individual hearts, forms, or thoughts. That was why all of the nameless devout were identical in appearance. They were literally without selves. They existed only as manifestations of their sin. The nameless devout were one and they were many. There were many and there were one. That was their truth. However, Ash added, shifting his feet so that he now faced away from Yuri. As I said, in very rare circumstances, something happened to the last vessel. Things, well, did not go according to plan. I and others believe this is because only the last vessel has the opportunity to face the hero not just as a vessel, but as a summoner, or being banished to the Nameless Land. In that instant, and it may last no more than an instant, the last vessel has access to the entirety of the hero's memory and full extent of the hero's strength. In this, they reach a state of being that no other vessel, or even a wolf, could hope to obtain. It is there that they touch the mystery that lies at the heart of the circle, and gain the power of true sight. Should that moment give birth to regrets within the last vessel, it can result in an incomplete nameless devout, Ash explained. Though an incomplete devout is still a nameless devout, still lacking individual memory and appearance, their deficits are only temporary. They have only forgotten who they were, not lost it completely. And that's what my brother, what Sky was? Yuri asked, her voice more shrill than she had intended. Is that what you were talking about up on the hill? Ash turned, looking Yuri straight in the eyes. He nodded. That doesn't make sense, Yuri said, her voice rising. That's not what Sky said at all. He told me that he had been waiting for me to arrive. That when he heard the first bell ring, it moved him. Sky had been nothing, but in that moment, something was born inside him. He wasn't just remembering something he had already had, or was he? The ringing of the first bell did not give him a heart. That's what you're thinking. It awakened the fragments of the heart he once had. The fragments were incomplete, and their number few. Yuri had to put a hand on her chest to steady her own breathing. He didn't realize anything until then? He didn't know he had a heart? He didn't know that he was different from the others? I mean, if he knew when he had come to the Nameless Land, then... Yuri drew a sharp breath. There is no time in the Nameless Land. He did not realize the truth, the wolf stated bluntly. He merely acted out of instinct. He had forgotten who he once was, yet when you came here, he knew he must join you on your journey. He wished it of his own accord. I believe it was Sky trying to make right for what he had done as her brother, whether he knew it or not. Ash sighed. Incomplete devout is dangerous. They have touched the hero. They have touched the King in Yellow. While they hold on to the fragments of who they once were as the last vessel, they maintain a tenuous connection with the terrible power of the hero. And the archdevout, silent until now, spoke in a low, calm voice. You might think of him as being a nameless devout who bears the yellow sign. Yuri stared long and hard at the archdevout. It made sense. In fact, probably the best way he could have explained it to her at that time, she realized. You mean, he had to purify himself? That's why Sky became my servant. That's why the archdevout cast him out of the Nameless Land. That's why he told me to take Sky with me. So if he was near the glyph, they would purify him, like with Aju? Ash shook his head. does not work for an incomplete devout as it does for a book. Mere proximity to the glyph is not enough to remove the yellow sign. As in the moment when the summoner enables the hero to escape, all must be brought together. The summoner, the hero, King in Yellow. Only then will the last vessel return to its former shape, Ash explained. And then the last vessel has regained itself, must once again throw itself to the hero. This, Ash explained, was because the incomplete devout, with its tenuous connection to the hero, was more like a reflection of the hero than anything. Until it returned to its master and became whole, there would be no destroying it, nor purifying it. That is why they were so dangerous. Incomplete devout is none other than a bad seed that the hero has planted in both the circle and in the Nameless Land. Through that seed, the hero can exert a different influence on the world. Purify the last vessel, thereby make the Nameless Devout complete, the all-cast true mission. Ash fixed his gaze on her then. You have completed your mission, Yuri. That was the very goal of your journey from its beginning. Rather, when Sky appeared, your goal changed from the recapture of the hero to purifying the Nameless Devout. No one told me the truth. The culling of such bad seeds is as important and as vital as sapping the hero of its strength and returning it to this land. It had to be you who purified Sky, thereby Hiroki Murasaki. You lied to me, so I'd do it. Yuri realized she had been gritting her teeth. Her hands were clenched into fists. No one told me the truth. You deceived me. The Archdevout swayed under the barrage of Yuri's voice. Ash stepped closer to her, kneeling between them as if to protect the ancient man. Do not blame the Archdevout. Till he saw the sign, he too was unaware that an incomplete devout had been created. The sign? The Archdevout looked up, blinked slowly, and said, When we opened the casket, withdrew the hollow book, saw that the glyph of the All-Cast was not upon its cover. That was the sign. That's why you were surprised. The state of the book had been a shock to the Archdevout, even more so the arrival of Sky, a nameless devout like them, but younger, different. A nameless devout who was not complete. He wasn't just surprised by the turn of events, Yuri. The Archdevout was sad for you. He was sad because he realized you no longer journeyed to imprison the hero. But why? Yuri shouted. He clutched the Archdevout's robes, pulled his frail body toward her, and glared sidelong up at Ash's stern face. Why didn't any of you tell me then? If I'd only known. What would you have done? I would have thought of a different way to do things. What different way? You didn't have any choice in the matter. Well, if I had? If I could have found one? He turned to the wolf, grabbing his cloak collar and shaking him. I could have taken him back home. I could have taken my brother home. Sky was not your brother. Didn't even look like him. But he used to be my brother. I dragged him to the hero to purify him. It wasn't some bad seed to be cold. He was my brother. Didn't my brother become an incomplete devout because he regretted what he had done? Didn't he regret getting sucked in by the Book of Elam? I would have forgiven him. Of course I would have. He's my only brother. Yuri. Ash shook his head, and his white bangs fell down across his forehead, making him look suddenly older. Maybe just tired. Didn't I just tell you that an incomplete devout is a dangerous thing? Were you to bring him back to the circle, it would mean calamity. How do you know that? If I brought him home, and he met Mom and Dad again, he could have returned to his old life. Bet all his memories would have come back, maybe even in his old form. They would not, the Archdevout said quietly. They can never come back, Lady Yuri. Once a part of the hero, always a part, unchanging until the day they are purified. Bad seed is also sometimes called the gate. Yuri's eyes went wide at Ash's words. It is a gate through which the hero may exercise its power. It is an entrance. You said you had heard someone use the word before. You remember where? It was when that giant creature appeared at Hiroki School, took Sky in its tentacles. Little dust puppet, you are the gate? In their original forms, the hero and the king in yellow are nothing more than stories, invisible to the eye. Though they may reside in the men's hearts and guide their actions, they cannot manifest physically within the circle. The hero who took Kirik's form But the hero took Kirik's form back in the capital, Yuri retorted. That was because it took his eyes, wasn't it? Not because of some gate. Ash smiled mysteriously. It's because the Hatelands is itself a story, is an imaginary place. Had you forgotten? Yuri put a hand to her mouth. So stories like the hero and the king in yellow can take shape in regions woven of stories? Yes, this is a parlor trick, ineffective in the circle. And yet, that creature appeared quite readily by the library in your brother's school. Do you know why? It's because Sky was there. A giant eyeball manifested itself through Sky. It was what it meant by the gate. Were you to bring Sky back home with you, you would be giving such creatures free access to the circle. They would boil forth and destroy all within their reach. And the people would rise up to drive them back, weapons in hand. There would be war. I'm sure you do not need me to tell you that what war entails. It is nothing less than the most terrible sign of the coming of both the hero and of the king in yellow. Terrible sign of the coming of both the hero and the king in yellow to the circle, Ash said, his voice growing stronger. What happened in Elmsgard could happen in your circle, your region, your country, your town, your school. The ones you love would be devoured by monsters, transformed into horrible things. Lamenting, they would bury the bodies of their loved ones and drift through the wreckage of their world, forced to hunt down and destroy former lovers, friends, brothers, sisters who had become something other than human. You really want your hometown turned into Elmsgard? Yuri had forgotten even to breathe. Had forgotten that Ash and the Archdevout stood before her. She had retreated entirely inside herself. Visions of the body she had seen strewn about the wreckage of the palace filled her mind. The terrible, deformed creatures that seemed to bubble forth from the ground, no matter how many they slew. That could happen in my world. If she hadn't seen what she had seen, her choice would have been simple. Archdevout had turned to her, told her the truth the moment they took the book from the casket and saw the sign. Yuri would have taken Sky by the hand, brought him directly back to Ichiro Minochi's reading room, and they would have gone home. No matter how much they might have pleaded with her, Yuri's desire to save Sky, save her brother, would have been stronger, pushing all such concern aside. So you did it to convince me, then, Yuri whispered. A tear rolled down one cheek. She didn't even remember having wept it. You hid the truth and sent me on my journey so that I would see it for myself. For that we are sorry, the Archdevout apologized as he prostrated himself before her. Yuri looked down at him and sniffled. Her next tear fell from her chin onto the nape of the Archdevout's neck. During your journey, did Sky not begin to recover fragment memories of Kirik in the Hatelands? So Ash had noticed too. He did remember, and made him worry. The Book of Elm was the key to the hero's escape. That's why Hiroki Murasaki, in the last vessel, possessed a dim recollection of Kirik. That is what Sky remembered. And Morgan, the wolf we met in Elmsgard? Ash nodded. Said you were doing something terrible. He knew what was going on, didn't he? Ash cast his eyes aside, as though he were ashamed to meet her gaze. He thought it was wrong to bring Sky along with me. He has a good heart, that Morgan. But he lacks wisdom, Yuri said. startled that Ash's wry smile from before seemed to have made its way to her own lips. I had to go. There's no two ways about it. Do not judge him so harshly, Ash said. It was only right for Morgan to censure me, and right for him to want to better your lot. Anyone with a heart would do the same. What was that Morgan said to me? There in the chaos of the broken city, with the mob thronging around us? You can cry if you like, but don't despair. Good advice, thought Yuri. To let her tears fall. Did Dr. Latore know the truth too? Ash nodded. So that's why I stopped Sky from going with me to the bottom of the cavern to meet my great uncle. And Aju? There's no immediate response. So Yuri looked up at Ash. His face was drawn in a scowl. And Yuri remembered something terribly important. Back in the Katahar Abbey, after we met with Mr. Minochi, I passed out. When I awoke, everyone was acting so strange. Is that when Aju discovered the truth? Ash sighed, his face still dark. When you saw Minochi's true form, you screamed, did you not? Yes. Sky heard that scream, came running down there, all the way to the bottom. He ran without thought, turned only for you, wanting to save you, pushing aside all who tried to stop him. Yet he never reached Minochi's cell. I barred his path. I do not believe that Sky fully understood why at the time, though. Must have thought it odd. Perhaps even guessed at that point. But... oh, sorry. I do not believe that Sky fully understood why at that time. Though he must have thought it odd. And perhaps guessed at the truth. But Minochi knew. So when Sky came close, he sensed it, I think. It was to prevent this that I stopped him. But I was too late. Ash shook his head. Minochi began to call out. With his power, the very power that twisted him into the form you saw, Ichiro Minochi could peer through Sky's mask to see the remnants of Hiroki Murasaki within. Called Hiroki by name. The madness took him. He howled with laughter, screaming, Hiroki, over and over. Minochi had laughed and babbled words of apology that made no sense, and began to chant the jumbled words of a curse. Minochi had completely lost his mind. Thankfully, none of his words reached Sky. Ash explained Aju was not so fortunate. The Aonkawi dictionary knew deep shame then. While you slept, we discussed it together. Aju spoke with the books in the abbey, asking for their advice. It had been Ash's suggestion that Aju leave as soon as it was possible. But Aju swore he would stay by you to the last. He wanted to be there when you learned the truth. Warm tears streamed down Yuri's cheek. Where is he now? Last time she had seen him, he was in Elm's burial chamber, and the hero's power had literally blown them all away. He didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. Do not worry. I'll find him, and return him to his original form. Books cannot die, Ash added, a genuine smile on his face for the first time in a long while. Marched about? Yuri asked, wiping her face with the sleeve of her vestments, and turning to the ancient man. The nameless devout were all last vessels. It means you too were once a last vessel, yes? Archdevout sat with his hands on his knees, and nodded slowly. Though I have no way of counting the time that has passed in this land, where time stands still, I believe my own transformation happened in another age, far in the distant past. I remember, before I left here for the first time... I remember, before I left here for the first time, when I asked you what bad the nameless devout had done, you told me that you were guilty of the sin of trying to live a story, trying to live a lie, to make the lie real. What does that mean? How could that be worse than allowing the hero to escape? The archdevout did not reply. quietly raised his eyes and looked in Ash's direction. The response came from Ash, in the form of a question. What is a story, Yuri? Something a weaver makes, I suppose. A lie. Not only weavers make stories. All people make stories simply by living out their lives. Dr. Latore had said something familiar. He had told her that there was no other way for men to live. People walk through their lives, leave stories behind them, like footprints in the sand. Yet sometimes we place stories in front of us, choosing the brightest form from those that hang in the firmament of the circle to guide us. When we try to live those stories, we fall prey to foolishness. We're attempting to imitate the story as we think it should be, not as it is. These stories we follow have many names. Sometimes they're called justice, other times victory, or even conquest. Sometimes they are simply called success. Charge forward, following a vision invisible to those around us. That is the sin of trying to live a story. In our pride, we place the ideal before the deed, and this brings only misfortune. The sin of living a story is great indeed, so great that the last vessel becomes a nameless devout, sent here to atone for that sin over an eternity. But let me be clear, Ash continued. The sin lies not with the story, yet the weavers know that sometimes stories can mislead our hearts. They know this, yet they continue their weaving. That is a conscious act and invites karmic retribution. Still, they are allowed to continue in their work because they also bring hope, goodness, beauty, warmth, and the joy of life to men. As the hero and the king in yellow are two sides of one coin, so are the nameless devout who turn the great wheels of inculpation here, and the weavers who remain in the circle. The cycling of stories is also the cycling of human deeds, Ash said, his tone that of a philosopher expounding a well-known truth to one of his students. My brother was guilty of such a great sin? Yuri asked, her voice faltering, body swaying. He did something so bad? He tried to become the hero, Ash replied, the very embodiment of heroic justice. And he did not wisely choose his means to that end. Brother took the life of one of its classmates. Without a moment's hesitation, he soiled his hands, the blood of another child of the circle. All for justice, for victory. Yuri shouted. But the kids he was dealing with were really bad. They attacked him first. Mean you're not allowed to strike back? Does that make it all right to commit murder? Was it all right for him to be their sole judge and executioner? Ash shook his head. When a child anywhere in the circle takes up a weapon in order to remove those who do not see as he does, this leads to war. A war great enough to destroy the entire circle. It is not an isolated event. Surely you understand that now. In a world in which a child may take the life of another, the same world in which 10,000 soldiers may kill 10,000 more. One is many, and many are one. Yuri realized that 10,000 wasn't just a number. It referred to the idea of everything inside the circle. So who gets to judge evil then? Are we not allowed to accuse people who do wrong? Yuri asked, her voice almost a scream. Ash waited for the echoes to fade before he replied calm as ever. That is why men created the story we call law. Even as we walk on through an eternity, leaving repeated mistakes and endless sacrifices as we cross rivers of tears, we have found a story that attempts to put things right. The story of law is written in the language of our footsteps. Because of this, it is not without faults. Yet should we forget the law and make stories as we wish for us or others to live, that is a sin. Yuri hugged herself and cried. Then another thought occurred to her. People he fought, that teacher and the bullies in his class, they all did the same thing. How is their justice any better than Hiroki's? It was not. They are sinners too, inculpated, and rightly so, as said, his voice expressing nothing but sadness. Yet they did not find the Book of Elam. They did not meet the hero. Thus are they judged only within the circle, not here in the Nameless Land. But that's not fair! In that instance, Yuri understood why Ichiro Minochi roared in the dungeon beneath the Katahara Abbey ruins. He understood his thirst to put things right by his own hands, to make just the unfairness that had taken his once hope, his one consolation away. That's why he wanted to raise the dead. Yuri whimpered. Her brother might have wanted what the hero had to offer the moment he picked up that knife. But that's the only time. Just one moment out of so many. Why should he have to give up the rest of his life to atone for that? Archdevout laid his hand on Yuri's back. There is no time in the Nameless Land. Does that mean there's no suffering, no weariness? Something that Morgan had said flashed through Yuri's mind. Hadn't he called the Nameless Devout holy men? Holy men, carrying the weight of man's sin. Your brother is not here in the Nameless Land, Archdevout said then. All that is here are the Nameless Devout. Ash nodded. The Nameless Devout are nothing. While their soul rests in the great flow of stories, till such a time as it will re-enter the circle inside another life. You see, he waits for rebirth. He feels no pain. You ensured that when you purified him. The wolf's words did not reach Yuri's heart. All she had to offer in response was more tears. What will I tell my mom, my dad? They're still hoping, still worried, waiting for Hiroki to come home. Leave that to stories. Facing grief is one time, and stories can help most. And pray with them. Leave a new story with your prayers. That the peace your brother has found might some day enter the hearts of your parents as well. Now stand, Ash instructed. It is time for you to return to the circle. Remove your vestments and return them to the Archdevout. For a moment, Yuri didn't understand what he was saying. And when she did, her body went rigid. She clutched the vestments to her, doubling over where she stood. I can't go home. On the floor, she began to crawl away from Ash and the Archdevout. Stop the hero. I'll avenge Hiroki. I'm the only one who can do it, right? And the hero is still free. I am the one who bears the mark. Ash closed. Ash shook his head. Not any longer. The glyph has left you. The role here is ended. Remember just now when the glyph was absorbed into the hollow book? The glyph you bore had no further purpose after you purified Sky. You are no longer the All-Cast, nor will you ever be again. Why not? Why can't I be? Don't you wish to return home? Ash asked, a hint of his old mocking tone returning to his voice. Well, what will you do now then? What will you do now then, Ash? How are you going to bind the hero without an All-Cast to help you? There are other All-Casts, Yuri. You merely need to find them. In fact, you might say that the tides have shifted in my favor. The hero used the Book of Elam to create a material form. It becomes more and more like Kirik every day. An enemy that imitates my brother is an enemy I know well. So all Ash would have to do was find someone, an All-Cast, whose voice could reach Kirik. Yuri. Ash called her name, his voice more gentle than she had ever heard it before. The Nameless Devout were once last vessels, yes? How many Nameless Devout do you think are here in this land? Yuri thought about it a moment, and her mouth opened wide. That's right. More than any of us can count. This more than anything else is proof that the hero escaped many times before, been caught just as many times. In fact, the times when the hero is not in the circle are fewer than the times when he is. The hero's imprisonment is the exception. He is imprisoned only for brief intervals, during long stretches of time between which he roams freely, Ash explained. is a testament to how much men desire the hero. They desire it, even when they know the dangers of the King in Yellow. It is our nature. Ash smiled. Do not worry. You are still young. Return to your world and live out your life. Live and be happy. I will handle things on this side. That's why we wolves exist. Why we are allowed to live. Ash extended his hand from his tattered robes. Yuri took it and stood. Beside her, the Archdevout stood as well. Just be careful. The hero is in the circle. Time of conflict is at hand. Ash warned her, squeezing her hand tightly in his own. You're one of few in the circle to return there, knowing the ways of this forsaken land. Conflict rages, and men look up to the hero, their eyes deceived by the lure of the King in Yellow. You will know what to say. Do not lose your voice. Your eyes can see what is right, and what must be. Do not close them. Your courage led you here, and the successful completion of your duties is all cast. It will not fail you. If today one child should learn to sheath a blade, then tomorrow the armies will halt their march. One leads to many, to all. Master Ash, the Archdevout called out to the wolf. You have forgotten something very important. The Archdevout smiled at Yuri. Though the hero was not bound, you have completed your mission, Lady Yuri. Before you leave us, you have the right to name a part of our land. There's a break right here, but it is not even half a page, so I'm just going to keep reading. Yuri led Ash and the Archdevout to the central courtyard of the Hall of All Books. It was as jumbled as a place as it had been when she had first seen it, with its bizarrely winding roads and passageways. It was dear and familiar to her all the same. Now those buildings stood beneath a sky full of stars. The light, the nameless land, only ornamentation. That, Yuri said, pointing straight up. Sky told me you call that the heavens here. This is true, the Archdevout said, nodding. Those aren't just the heavens. That's the sky. The sky of the nameless land. Yuri shook her head. I wonder if it'll ever be blue. She could see the stars so clearly. Who could say that the sun won't rise someday soon into a cloudless land, and the nameless devout who had joined her on her journey would look up, his eyes filled with wonder. Very well. From this point on, that which arcs above our heads is Lady Yuri's sky. Archdevout bowed and gently lifted the vestments of protection from Yuri's shoulder. Yuri's eyes filled with tears, and she put her hands to her face, trying in vain to hold them in. You did well, Ash said. You and your brother both. This is goodbye. Farewell. That was her last word of parting, brief and to the point. From Ash, she expected nothing else. Okay, so now all we have is the epilogue. I'm going to take a sip. Several days had passed since Yuri had returned home and returned to being Yuriko Murasaki. The memories of her journey were still vivid in her mind, yet strangely, no matter how often she thought of what had happened, the sadness that had left her hollow before refused to show itself. She was protected from it somehow, shielded in stillness and light, her heart as serene as a boat drifting on a quiet sea under a blue sky. She had arrived directly from the nameless land to her own room. The first person she met was her double. Yuriko's double had been sitting at her desk. When the double saw Yuriko, she stood and greeted her, spreading her arms and smiling in silence, to show she knew everything that had happened. She understood. Yuriko accepted her embrace, and her double hugged her tight. Her double was warm, despite being made of magic. It seemed like she was there not just to take her place in this region while Yuri traveled through the magic lands, to take on Yuriko's emotional burden. The double would carry that lingering hurt, so Yuriko didn't have to. Maybe that was her real purpose all along. Yuriko was alone in her room. She hadn't even noticed her double leave. It was the middle of the night. She changed and gone to bed. When she awoke, her old daily routine was waiting for her. At least her routine, such as it had been since Hiroki's disappearance. Her parents still waited for her brother to return, but there was an empty chair at the table and an empty room next to hers. Yet Yuriko felt different because she knew what had happened. She knew what had become of her brother, and where he was now. She knew in her heart that she just had to tell her parents that she knew somehow, and everything would be better. It felt like Yuri was still there, too, inside her, supporting her, though that might have only been her imagination. It would be okay, I think. An errant breeze tugged at her heart, making her sway. She soon regained her footing. No, I will be okay. She started going to school again. There was the occasional uncomfortable silence, the occasional conversation that faltered as she walked by, but things had changed for the better. Time had passed not only for her, but for all her friends as well. That, or my double was really hard at work putting things right while I was gone. At home, Yuriko's newfound calm was infectious. Little by little, you feel her parents relaxing as well. They never forgot Hiroki, of course, not even for a moment. Mother still cried a lot. There were nights when nobody slept. Yet like a glyph lighting the darkness, Yuriko was the warm center of the household now. And gradually, her family was able to pick itself up off the floor, wipe the dust off its knees, get back to the business of living. If they were going to welcome Hiroki back to the family someday, there's no point letting the place fall apart in the meantime. They had to be strong. Yuriko saw in her parents' faces now and then, kind of bright resolve, determination to keep going. It'll be okay, I think. Yuriko put a hand to her chest, and stilled the flood in her heart. Yuriko wondered what had become of Ichiro Minochi's cottage and reading room, but it wasn't the easiest thing to ask about. She couldn't decide on the right timing to bring up the subject. The disappointment her mother had suffered when they went there looking for Hiroki still weighed heavily on her, but she didn't seem eager to talk about the place. Her father was gradually getting back into life, worrying about how he would split a worthless inheritance from an uncle who wasn't even a blood relation was low on his list. She could just bring it up, but she was afraid she would be bringing back all those memories of the night they had broken in there, full of hope, searching through the darkened cottage to find only dust. How their hope had changed to despair, how their certainty had been dashed to pieces. Her parents would sink back into the funk she had found them in, and Yuriko wanted to avoid that if at all possible. That, and there was a more pressing question on Yuriko's mind. She never found out whether her parents knew about the girl Michiru and Inui. Had Michiru come to them and told them the truth? Did they know already, and they just weren't letting on? They really didn't know. Should she tell them? The police had surely looked into Hiroki's motives, just as surely passed on anything they had learned to her parents. Yuriko wondered how much of the truth they had really been able to uncover. Had school been successful in keeping its own missteps out of the public eye? If they were all that successful, why would the police have come asking me questions? Yuriko kept to herself when she thought about these things, so her parents wouldn't see something on her face to make them worry. When she had taken all the doubts and questions out of her heart, and laid them on the table, examining each of them from every possible angle, she came to a conclusion. The only people who knew why Hiroki Murasaki had done what he did were Michiru and Inui, Miss Kanahashi, his teacher, and Yuriko. Parents knew nothing, neither did the police. Teachers at school who knew were pretending they didn't. They were keeping their mouths shut. Hiroki's classmates as well, no doubt. It wouldn't surprise her if the school had taken action to make sure no one tattled. Yet Yuriko's heart still stirred with doubt. She wanted to tell her parents. She wanted to tell them the truth, bitter though it was. She wanted them to see it as she did. To see how Hiroki had sacrificed himself for Michiru, and how close they had been. But would Hiroki even want that? Would he want me to tattle? One thing was for sure. If she did tell, there would be casualties. It could only make life more miserable for Michiru. She would blame herself again, just like she did when she had met Yuri, the book spirit, in the school library. No matter how much her parents might try to console her, try to tell her it wasn't her fault, she would continue to blame herself. But wasn't Yuriko blaming herself already? Poor Michiru was doomed either way. And there was Miss Kanahashi. She'd been affected too. She'd already tried to take responsibility for the mess in her classroom, and it had done her no good at all. Still, she didn't think her parents would blame Hiroki's teacher for that. Rather, they would thank her for doing what she could to try to help. Might even help take some of the burden of guilt off her shoulders. Yuriko was in a position to help her. Yuriko ruminated. Which was the right path? What would Hiroki want? To this question she could find no answer. The more she thought about it, the less certain she felt. No observation or reasoning could divine the way out of her conundrum. When the light did shine down upon Yuriko's path, it came from an unexpected direction. On a day in early summer, with vacation not too far away. Hold on, let me readjust my chair. You really found a buyer? Yuriko's mother asked, stopping as she carried a plate in from the kitchen. Somebody actually wants that dingy old place? Her father had come home and sat down at the dinner table that night, when he suddenly announced that someone had called wanted to buy Ichiro Minochi's belongings. You're getting ahead of yourself, mother, her father replied. No one's buying the cottage. A man came inquiring about those books. Remember the ones in the reading room? Brother had called with the news that day at lunch. Yuriko's father explained. The buyer seemed quite eager. Wanted to make sure that we sold an entire library to him and no one else. The lawyer they had put in charge of the whole affair said it didn't sound like a bad deal. Yuriko sat down next to her mother and began to eat, all the while pricking up her ears to catch any scrap of information she could. Her heart was racing. Are those books really all that valuable? Seems so. It's difficult, though, to find a place that can appraise them. Think of how some of them are downright ancient. Hardly any are in Japanese. Even if we hired an expert to come and do an appraisal, we wouldn't be able to handle all of the books. An appraisal fee would likely be out of this world. The lawyer was advising that they take advantage of the opportunity. Might be the easiest way to deal with the matter by far. Then we'd just be taking whatever this buyer quotes us. What if one or two of those books are really worth something? Yuriko's mother protested. She was already worried about the bottom line. Not that there was anything wrong with that. Yuriko would rather have her worrying about the family finances than anything else. It's certainly a possibility, her father said with a chuckle. The buyer is a used book salesman himself, and not just any used book salesman. He leaned across the table with an air of importance. He's the manager of that store in Paris where Mr. Minochi had his heart attack. The store was located along the scene. Its name, translated in Japanese, was the Babbling Spring. The manager was a man of 55 by the name of Franz Coulier. The lawyer showed my brother a picture of him, apparently. He's a handsome old fellow. Looks like Gene Gavin. My other friend. Who's Gene Gavin? The stirring in Yuriko's chest grew into realization. Ichiro Minochi didn't die in that bookstore. He went to the Hate-Lands, leaving his humanity and his sanity behind. No one here in the circle, in Yuri's region, doubted the story that her great-uncle had died in Paris. Which means that there is a very deft cover-up, and the owner of the Bubbling Spring was involved. Handsome old Franz is a wolf. Even if he isn't, he knows about the nameless land in the circle. How else could he have helped Minochi get away? And now that this conspirator was trying to buy her great uncle's books. Well, I think we should sell them to him, Yuriko said, playing the part of the precocious child. It would sure make those books happy. I'll bet some of them even came from this bubbling spring place. Her parents looked at each other. Yuriko went back to eating, chewing her food like she chewed on another thought. If they sold the lot of books, there would be no more reading room. The books would leave the cottage. Before that happens, I want to visit there again. Say goodbye. It wasn't difficult. Just had to mix a little bit of untruth in with the truth. Hey Mom, all that talk about the cottage last night made me remember something important. Did you know Hiroki went back after he visited that one time? With the teacher from school and one of his friends. Told me to keep it a secret. I guess I forgot about it. Sorry. I remember the teacher's name now. Miss Kanahashi? Maybe she knows who the friend was. I think it was a girl. Judging from her mother's reaction, it was clear that she had no idea that Hiroki had been so close to any teacher, nor had Hiroki seen fit to tell her. Even more, the news that there had been a girl Hiroki liked enough to take on a secret summer drive through the mountains hit her like a bolt from the blue. Things progressed quickly after that. It had not been but 3 days since Hiroki's confession. Since Yuriko's confession. Miss Kanahashi visited the Murasaki household. Yuriko had pictured the teacher was a slightly dumpy, kindly lady. When she saw Miss Kanahashi standing in front of the apartment door, she felt she couldn't have been more wrong. Miss Kanahashi was light and slender and moved with a spring in her step. Like a fawn. She was cute, too, with freckles across the bridge of her nose. Yuriko wasn't there when her parents talked to Miss Kanahashi. She waited in her room, holding her breath, straining her ears to listen. She heard her mother crying a few times, Miss Kanahashi crying too. Hiroki's teacher had left the school before summer vacation. The school administration had made it clear they didn't want her to talk about what had happened, and now that she wasn't working there anymore, all bets were off. It was another 2 days before Yuriko's parents went with Miss Kanahashi to meet Michiru. When they came home that evening, her parents looked exhausted. Her mother's eyes were swollen and red from crying. Finally, I know what he was going through, Yuriko's mother said after telling her what they had heard. Her mom put one hand to her chest and began to cry again. Mom? Dad? Are you mad at her? Her father shook his head, but her mother said, No, we're not angry. Then she hugged Yuriko to her and whispered, So sad. So sad, over and over. Finally, they know. Yuriko felt more peace inside her than she had in a while. She hugged her mother back. Now or never. There's something I wanted to ask you. I wanted to go back to the reading room, where the books were taken away. I wanted to go there with Miss Kanahashi and Michiru. On the first weekend of summer vacation, 6 people piled into 2 cars. The Murasakis led the way, with Miss Kanahashi, Michiru's mother in the car behind them. It was a perfect summer day. They drove out under a blue sky. When they arrived, Yuriko had her first experience with bushwhacking. The weeds had grown so thick that around Minochi's cottage, they had to pull out every cutter and clipper they could find just to get through. Surprisingly, or perhaps it wasn't so surprising at all, Michiru never recognized Yuriko as Yuri, the book spirit that had visited her. Even in different clothes and without Yuri's particular speech and tone, Yuriko was sure that her face would give her away. There was not even a glimmer of recognition in the other girl's eyes. Her memory had been erased. A day in the library had never happened, as far as Michiru was concerned. Is this another one of the circle's mechanisms? Yuriko wondered. You're Murasaki's little sister, aren't you? The princess in her damaged tower smiled brightly at Yuriko. So nice to meet you. Murasaki always used to talk about his little Yuri. Then her voice choked and she apologized, a tear rolling from one eye. Mother reached down and wiped it from her cheek. Somehow Yuriko knew this. Them all being here together was exactly what Hiroki would have wanted. They started on the first floor and walked together, examining the different rooms and hallways and talking about the past. They took turns speaking, or crying, and occasionally even laughing, till they reached the reading room. Whether she was scared or just couldn't bear the weight of her own memories, Michiru didn't want to go into the reading room. No one else spent very long in there either, giving Yuriko plenty of time to herself. It was dark inside, even in the middle of the day. A dim light leaked in through the small window. Yuriko would have been able to see if any of the books were shining, even faintly, but not a single one glimmered, nor did any of them speak a word. The glyph was gone from the middle of the floor. It had been neatly swept away. Yuriko guessed that Ash had been here and seen to that. Still, it hadn't kept her from hoping that were she to stand in the reading room alone, something would change. Something miraculous might happen. There are no miracles today. The circle was closed. It was her path to the Nameless Land. The only thing coming from the countless old books in that room now was an oppressive silence. She took a step toward the stepladder she had sat on during her previous visit, and something wrapped around her ankle. The same strip of black cloth she had found when she first came here with Aju. The way it wrapped around her foot was almost lifelike. With a shiver, she reached down to yank it off, found it surprisingly heavy in her hands. What is this thing? Wait. Even as she held it, one edge of the cloth was turning to black dust. She watched as it spread, till the whole length of it had evaporated into fine particles. Yuriko suddenly realized what it was. A realization coming not from within, but as though someone had thrown it into her mind from the outside. This is the cloth that Mr. Minochi used to hold the Book of Elam. That's why I found it lying on the floor. Roki must have dropped it when he took the book. It had been so heavy. Perhaps some enchantment was on it, something to distract the hero's gaze. She wondered where the book was now. And perhaps the hero, now more and more Kirik every day, had retrieved it. How much of his own fragmented body had Kirik been able to collect? All that was happening far, far away in the Hatelands. Aju, she ventured in a tiny voice. Aju, are you there? There was no response. Yuriko had been ready for this, but still, it was another disappointment. She hoped Aju hadn't been injured during the run-in with the hero. There was a noise behind her. Yuriko whirled around, expecting to see a tiny mouse there, his whiskers twitching with pride, or the man with strands of ashen gray hair, the tattered hem of his coat dragging on the floorboards. Michiru was standing in the doorway, a hand on the frame, staring again at her. Yuriko? Yuriko's heart fell back down into her chest with a thunk. Oh, right, Yuriko said, figuring that the girl had come to find her and bring her back to the others. She made to leave, but Michiru was slowly walking into the reading room toward her. This place, Michiru whispered, the old books that cover the walls absorbing her voice. It scared me when I was here last time. I know, thought Yuriko. You told me. Is it still scary? No, I guess not. Seems different now. Michiru smiled at her. Murasaki liked it here. You should have seen the way his eyes shone the one time we came here together. We used to talk about books. At the library at school? Yeah. Did you ever go to the library in town? A shadow came over Michiru's eyes. You mean the public library? Not very much. And she added in a low voice. We didn't want to run into anyone from school. Of course, Yuriko thought. With both of them being on the committee, it would have been strange to find them in the school library. But if someone saw them together outside of school, that would mean they were really friends and they were trying to show it to everyone. Just the kind of attention Michiru didn't want. The thought triggered something in Yuriko's memory and she blurted out. Did you know that something happened in that library this last spring? One of the books burned, just by itself. Yuriko knew Hiroki had done it with his magic, but she didn't know why. Maybe she does. The book burned? Michiru looked surprised. No, I hadn't heard anything like that. Yeah, and the funny thing is, the name of the book was Making the Most of Household Cleaners. Who'd burn a book like that? Before Yuriko had even finished speaking, Michiru's complexion changed. In the dim reading room, her face went so pale it seemed to shine like the full moon. Who told you that, Yuriko? One of the a friend at the library. Were they mad? No, more like confused. Michiru put a hand to her throat and took a deep breath. Even in that dusty, dark room, her profile was beautiful. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. For what? I think Morisaki did it. For me, she added quietly. When all the kids were picking on me at school, I got depressed. And I thought seriously about killing myself. Yuriko strained her posture and listened. There are some kinds of household cleaners that you're not supposed to mix together. If you do, it makes a poisonous gas. I was going to mix them in the bath. Finally, it made sense. And that book told you which ones? So you borrowed the book? I did. But that was just around the time that Morisaki started looking out for me. He had never taken that bath. Plans for suicide had been shelved. I told Morisaki about it later, and then he told me he would get rid of that book. So I want to never be tempted to do that sort of thing again. Michiru covered her face with her hands and crouched there in the reading room. Then he got rid of it, I guess. Yuriko pictured the scene in her mind. Maybe Hiroki hadn't planned on burning the book at first, but once he had the Book of Elm in his hands, and was fully under the hero's sway, it must have seemed like the perfect target for testing his newfound powers. He was protecting Michiru again, of course. He won't regret what he had done even now. He'd be satisfied. His incomplete self as a nameless devout had been erased. For closing the gate and protecting this world, Michiru's world, from the ravages of the King in Yellow. Yuriko knelt, closing her eyes, letting herself dissolve into the silence of the room. From the bookshelves, the books watched over the girls in the slanting light from the window. Though now they might be pretending to be nothing more than pages bound in leather, Yuriko knew the truth. At least, she hoped they were watching. Another 2 weeks passed. It was a hot afternoon, filled with buzzing of cicadas in the trees. Yuriko had gotten back from the swimming lessons at the pool, had eaten lunch, and was feeling very ready for a nap. Her mother had gone out to do some grocery shopping. The news on the television was talking about a war overseas. There were other reports of things happening in her own country, random murders, senseless atrocities. Yuriko knew what it all meant. War was coming. Another age of conflict loomed. But recently, she had begun to make her own sort of peace with that. There was a lot of bad news for sure. It wasn't like the end of the world was at her door, ringing the doorbell just yet. It wasn't that she didn't care. The realization was that there was very little she could do about it. It settled on her heart, like a dust collecting on the furniture in each room in Nochi's cottage. The feeling of powerlessness was slowly building up inside her with each passing day. She found she didn't mind it so much. The doorbell rang. Not now, I was just about to drift off. Yes, she called out half-heartedly, and opening the door with the safety chain still on to find a strange man smiling in at her. His broad grin showed a full set of perfect teeth. When he saw Yuriko, he nodded. Even in this heat, he wore a heavy-looking suit, with a necktie wrapped tightly around his collar. Yuriko Morisaki? The way he said her name sounded strange. The intonation was all wrong. Wait, he's not Japanese? The man certainly looked Japanese. Sorry if I startled you. The man grinned again and bowed. I am an interpreter. I bring someone who wants to meet you, Yuriko. Me? Yuriko asked, pointing at her nose. Yes, you. He is waiting downstairs. He wants to meet only you, and not my parents. That sounds suspicious. Yuriko squinted over the chain at the man. Who is it that wants to meet only me? The man replied immediately. Actually, I'm not sure myself, but he has told me that you would know him were I to introduce him as a friend of the Man of Ash. Her visitor was waiting in a strange-looking van with high suspension. The sliding door opened. She could see him looking out at her from the back seat. She knew she should never get in a strange car with a strange man. But this time seemed like an exception. A real exception. Yuriko ran up to the van. The man was wearing a white shirt, with a brilliantly colored blanket draped over his knees. When he saw Yuriko run up, all out of breath, he smiled merrily. He has perfect teeth, too. Those white teeth and white eyes and white shirt stood in stark contrast to the man's dark skin. He was a large man, with broad shoulders. Silver hair was cropped close to his scalp above a smooth forehead. Yuriko spotted a wheelchair folded in the back of the van. He's old. An old man. This is Yuriko, the interpreter said, running up behind her. The man beckoned Yuriko to sit in the seat next to him, pointing with one finger to his ear several times. He's wearing a hearing aid. Yuriko got into the van and sat next to him, feeling dwarfed by the man's size. The interpreter closed the sliding door and went around to the front to sit in the driver's seat. Their eyes met. The old man smiled again, nodding to her 2-3 times, then began talking rapidly, not even waiting for the interpreter to get settled. Yuriko couldn't make out a single thing he was saying. He says, "Hello," the interpreter translated, as he wiped the sweat from his brow. "Hello," Yuriko said back, bowing her head. "You're a friend of Ash. I mean, the Man of Ash." The interpreter spoke again, and the old man answered. She was pretty sure he wasn't speaking English. Other than that, she had no idea what language it was. "Yes," the interpreter said. "His name is Tali." Tali? Yuri had been able to make that word out in the jumble from the old man's mouth. "It is his wolf name. I'm sorry I do not know what that means. Do you know?" Yuriko swallowed, nodding. She could feel the sweat on the palm of her hands. "He knows you," the interpreter translated. The old man's tone was gentler now. He looked directly at Yuriko as he talked, now in broken Japanese. "You are Yuri. All caste Yuri, yes?" Yuriko's eyes went wide as she stared back at him. She nodded again. "I know of your journey. The Man of Ash told me. The other wolves called me Atali, Silvertooth." That's a cool name, Yuriko thought. A wolf with silver teeth. "I have known the Man of Ash, Dmitri, for a very long time." Dmitri. It seemed like years since she had last heard that name. "Dmitri does not age, but I have grown old. I am old man," he laughed. "I cannot fight any more, nor can I hunt. That is why I now retire." The man returned to speaking his own language so that he could speak more quickly. The interpreter, listening to every word and sweating profusely, nodded and occasionally asked questions. Yuriko steadied her own breath and tried to calm her wildly beating heart as she looked between the two. "You are very brave, Yuri," the interpreter said, turning back to Yuriko. "That is why Atali has come to you. That's why he expects so much of..." "Expects?" Yuriko asked a quick question to Atali, then turned back to her. "Yes, expects." Yuriko nodded. "I see, but what does he expect?" Her pulse was racing faster now. "If you would be so inclined, Mr. Atali has something to give you. He wants you to have it." With a nudge from the interpreter, Atali opened the top few buttons on his shirt, revealing an old yet muscular chest and a pendant hanging on a chain at his neck, nestled in silver chest hair. Sorry about that. My internet went out. That's frustrating. Yeah. Gonna wait a little bit for people to get back in here. Because, oh boy, that really sucked. Sorry I went out for like 12 minutes or something like that. Don't know why. Fucking Xfinity, man. Then, yeah, let me get the book again. Since I don't know how far back it got cut off, I am going to go back a couple pages and start reading. Yeah, I'll go back to when, she had a knock at her door. Hold on, let me close my door again. Oh man, everything's all fucked up on my end. Well, okay. So, I mean, another 2 weeks passed. It was a hot afternoon, filled with the buzzing cicadas in the trees. Yuriko had just gotten back from swimming lessons at the pool, eaten lunch, and was feeling ready for a nap. Her mother had gone out to do some grocery shopping. The news on the television was talking about a war overseas. There are other reports of things happening in her own country, random murders, senseless atrocities. Yuriko knew what it all meant. War was coming. Another age of conflict loomed. But recently, she had begun to make her own sort of peace with that. There's a lot of bad news for sure, but it wasn't like the end of the world. It wasn't like the end of the world. It was at her door, ringing the doorbell just yet. It wasn't that she didn't care. The realization that there was very little she could do about it had settled on her heart, like a dust collecting on the furniture in each Romanucci's cottage. The feeling of powerlessness was slowly building up inside her with each passing day, and she found she didn't mind it so much. The doorbell rang. Not now. I was just about to drift off. Yes, she called out half-heartedly, and opened the door with the safety chain still on to find a man smiling in at her. His broad grin showed a full set of perfect teeth. Yet when he saw Yuriko, he nodded. Even in this heat, he wore a heavy-looking suit with a necktie wrapped tightly around his collar. Yuriko Murasaki? He said... The way he said her name sounded strange. The annotation was all wrong. Wait, is he not Japanese? The man certainly looked Japanese. Sorry if I startled you. The man grinned again and bowed. I am an interpreter. I bring someone who wants to meet you, Yuriko. Me? Yuriko asked, pointing at her nose. Yes, you. He is waiting downstairs. He wants to meet only you. Not my parents. That sounded suspicious. Yuriko squinted over the chain at the man. Who is it that wants to meet only me? The man replied immediately. Actually, I'm not sure myself, but he has told me that you would know him were I to introduce him as a friend of the man in ash. The visitor was waiting in a strange-looking van with high suspension. The sliding door opened, and she could see him looking out at her from the back seat. She knew she should never get into a strange car with a strange man. This time seemed like an exception. A real exception. Yuriko ran up to the van. The man was wearing a white shirt. The brilliantly colored black blanket dripped over his knees. When he saw Yuriko run up, all out of breath, he smiled merrily. He has perfect teeth, too. Those white teeth and white eyes and white shirt stood in stark contrast to the man's dark skin. He was a large man, with broad shoulders. The silver hair was cropped close to his scalp, above a smooth forehead. Yuriko spotted a wheelchair folded in the back of the van. He's old. An old man. This is Yuriko, the interpreter said, running up behind her. The man beckoned Yuriko to sit in the seat next to him, pointing with one finger to his ear several times. He's wearing a hearing aid. Yuriko got into the van and sat next to him. Feeling dwarfed by the man's size, the interpreter closed the sliding door and went around to the front to sit in the driver's seat. Their eyes met. The old man smiled again, nodding to her 2, 3 times. He began talking rapidly, not even waiting for the interpreter to get settled. Yuriko couldn't make out a single thing he was saying. He says hello, the interpreter translated, as he wiped the sweat from his brow. Hello, Yuriko said, bowing her head. You're a friend of Ash. I mean, the man of Ash? The interpreter spoke again. The old man answered. He was pretty sure he wasn't speaking English. But other than that, she had no idea what language it was. Yes, the interpreter said. His name is Atali. Atali? Yuriko had been unable to make that word out in the jumble from the old man's mouth. It is his wolf name? I am sorry, I do not know what that means. Do you know? Yuriko swallowed, nodding. He could feel the sweat of the palms of her hands. He knows you, the interpreter translated. The old man's tone was gentler now. He looked directly at Yuriko as he talked, now in broken Japanese. You are Yuri. All cast Yuri, yes? Yuriko's eyes went wide as she stared back at him. She nodded again. I know of your journey. The man of Ash told me. The other wolves call me Atali Silvertooth. That's a cool name, Yuriko thought. A wolf with silver teeth. I have known the man of Ash, Dimitri, for a very long time. Dimitri. It seemed like years since she had last heard that name. Dimitri does not age, but I have grown old. I am an old man, he laughed. I cannot fight anymore, nor can I hunt. That is why I now retire. Here the man returned to speak in his own language, so he could speak more quickly. The interpreter, listening to every word and sweating profusely, nodded and occasionally asked questions. Yuriko steadied her own breath, tried to calm her wildly beating heart as she looked between the two. You are very brave, Yuri, the interpreter said, turning back to Yuriko. That is why Atali has come to you. That is why he expects so much of... Expects? The interpreter asked a quick question to Atali, then turned back to her. Yes, expects. Yuriko nodded. I see, but what does he expect? The pulse was racing faster now. If you would be so inclined, Mr. Atali has something to give you. He wants you to have it. With a nudge from the interpreter, Atali opened the top few buttons of his shirt, revealing an old yet still muscular chest with a pendant hanging on a chain at his neck, nestled in silver chest hair. Atali began to remove it, but his fingers did not move as nimbly as he would have liked, and eventually the interpreter had to lean from the driver's seat to help him. This is my mark. The pendant looked so small in Atali's large black hand. It glowed a dull silver. Yuriko saw that it was shaped like a fang. A wolf's fang. Dimitri does not know. But I have seen it in you. You are strong, far stronger than you know. Atali's hand tilted and the slender pendant chain began to slip. Yuriko quickly reached out to grab it as it fell. The pendant was warm to the touch, like it was alive. With his other hand, the man gently grasped Yuriko's wrist, rotating her palm upward, and placed the chain of the pendant on her hand. Atali smiled, and curled her fingers shut until she held the pendant tightly. You are strong. You have the makings of a wolf. I retire now. For this fang I pass to you. Will you take it? Atali had come a long way for this. He had crossed an ocean. But though his region might be a foreign land to Yuriko, they were both in the same circle, and wolves roamed everywhere. They had access to all places. Where are you from, Atali? The man interpreted. For some reason, Atali had to think before he answered. Homeland, he said. Yuriko lifted an eyebrow. Was that a country name? The man squinted and smiled as though he had expected this reaction. He began to talk rapidly, making the interpreter rush to keep up. Homeland is not a true country's name. It is the name of a district formed a long time ago in the Republic of South Africa. You know, in my country, there was a thing called apartheid. It means apartness. It was discrimination against those with black skin. Yes, my brother told me all about apartheid. He saw a movie about it or something. Atali nodded. It was in those days the white people told the black people, you must live here. Those places they called Butastans, or homelands. The interpreter continued, wiping his face with a handkerchief. A long time ago, in the Republic of South Africa, there was a story that told the white people that they could do what they... What's that story? Turn back to Atali for confirmation. Atali nodded. Yuriko nodded too. It was a story, yes, a popular one in those times. It was a story. People at the time might have thought of it as a philosophy, perhaps even the simple truth, but was in fact a story. That is when I became a wolf. My desire was to hunt the book that told the story that made one man hate another because of the color of his skin. There are no homelands now. There is no apartheid. He smiled. I live in Johannesburg. But Tali had been born a wolf on his homeland, and he had come from there to give Yuriko his fang. I have been searching for success for some time now. Tali looked with large eyes at Yuriko. His pupils glinted jet black. They reminded her of somebody else's eyes, the eyes of every brave man she had ever met. You would make a good wolf. You will journey again. You want to, yes? When you are older and stronger, you will journey to bind the hero. I know this. That is why I have come. The old man smiled. I may be glad to have met you. You are exactly as I imagined you would be. Yuriko's vision blurred. Why am I still crying after everything I've been through? Why am I still such a little crybaby? But these weren't a child's tears. You are strong. You journeyed well. Your journey was hard, but you saved your brother. You saved the circle. You are strong. The man's heavy hand rubbed Yuriko's head. Atali smiled. His smile was strong and gentle. I believe in you. I think Dimitri knows this too. He waits for you. He will wait a long time, for he will never die. He does not grow old, but he will soon be an adult. Dimitri the Undertaker, a man of ash, ash in his black cloak, one who is close to the dead. He was waiting to meet Yuriko again, waiting to walk the streets of the Hatelands with her again, where the tragic King Kirik ruled as the hero. Nadja would be there too, for sure, an Ankawi dictionary no longer. The silver fang glinted in Yuriko's palm, reflecting the light in her eyes. Thank you. Yuriko gripped the pendant tightly, the mark of the wolf in her hand. And that is the end of the book. Oh, I really enjoyed it. Not gonna lie, the ending did surprise me. I was expecting more of a fight with the hero, but as they said, like, you're in a fictional world. This is not a real world. And that, like, the whole point is just to basically free your brother from the sin that he's carrying. It's something that I've liked about her, Miyuki Miyabe's. Her, young adult stories is they tackle very heavy topics for a young adult story. A lot of the young adult stories that they had us read in school, they were like nothing. But uh, these to me are a lot more interesting. They cover a lot heavier topics, um, and you can see how like they're left with a way to interpret it as if you were the adult sitting there, kind of thing, like the parents. Your daughter's acting different because she's processing the grief, kind of thing. And everything's kind of getting back normal. Like, you could see her journey through the thing, her not being there, as her still in shock from everything that happened with her brother. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I really like the story. Now I just get to figure out what to do after that. What to do next Wednesday. But I appreciate you all for coming out. Let me try to find someone to raid. Uh, and what is she playing? No, I'm gonna send y'all over to Joey. Uh, I appreciate y'all for coming out. I'll be live for sure Friday. Um, and yeah, I'll be playing more Pyre on Friday, but I might stream a little bit tomorrow as like a guest with Ember. We'll see.